incredible leadership and be a model for dramatic greenhouse gas reductions in the state at a time when both are desperately needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Any other public comment? Okay. Seeing none, we'll move on. I can take an motion to set the agenda and approve consent agenda items.
I make the motion.
So moved,
Swing.
Larry May.
I'll second, Swing.
Okay, moved by May, seconded by Lee. And roll call vote, please.
Ann, you're on mute.
Thank you. If you would announce your agreement or disagreement with the motion when I announce your jurisdiction. County of San Mateo.
Yes.
County of San Mateo.
Yes.
Town of Atherton.
Yes.
City of Belmont.
Yes.
City of Brisbane. City of Burlingame.
Yes.
Town of Colma. City of Daly City.
Yes.
City of East Palo Alto. City of Foster City. City of Half Moon Bay.
Yes.
Town of Hillsborough.
Yes.
City of Menlo Park.
Yes.
City of Millbrae.
Yes.
City of Pacifica.
Yes.
Town of Portola Valley.
Yes.
City of Redwood City.
Yes.
City of San Bruno.
Yes.
City of San Carlos.
Yes.
City of San Mateo.
Yes.
City of South San Francisco.
Yes.
Town of Woodside.
Yes.
And the motion passes.
Thank you. Okay, next up, Desiree Fayer, the chair of the Citizens Advisory Committee, is here to give us a brief CAC update. Desiree, go ahead.
Morning, everyone. I just have a short update from our last meeting. We spent quite a bit of time actually with reports from our different working groups. As you all may remember, we've kind of moved to a different model where our working groups reports from them are taking up more time in our meetings so that we can hopefully work together as a committee to bring more things to staff and also to you as the board. So one of our working groups that's really been working hard has been our equity group, and they're working on some language that hopefully we'll be able to bring to you maybe within the next month or two. They're really being thoughtful and came to our committee to get input on things we'd like to include in a statement that perhaps PCE could adapt that would be more straightforward about their position on equity. And let's see, we also had a nice update as well from staff. And I think that was on our, sorry, I'm just looking at my notes here. Oh, and we started discussing for our public forums some topics that are of interest to us, but we're going to continue that discussion. As you may recall, that's one of the things that's listed as our duties that we haven't really worked on much. And so we'd like to come up with some ideas and work with staff on what would be the most appropriate to hold as our first public forum. Are there any questions from the board?
Thank you, Desiree. And if you have a question, raise your hand. I'll just start by saying that the committee has been doing some really, they've done a lot of really great work this year. I've been sitting in on almost every meeting. They've formed several groups and have welcomed some new members who are definitely bringing some new ideas. And it's been really interesting to watch them sort of organize around things that we've been talking about before and some new ideas like the equity conversation they're having. So thanks to Desiree and the committee. Does anyone else have any questions right now? Oh, and a quick reminder, I have a few people who have agreed to step up and be kind of a committee of liaisons to the CAC. If anyone's interested, please do let me know and I will come up with a roster and approve at our next meeting. Thanks. Okay, if there are no other questions on the CAC, we will move on to the strategic plan update. Thanks again, Desiree. Jan, go ahead.
Thank you, Jeff. Good morning to everyone. I did want to note, not quite sure what happened, but the agenda here doesn't show that we're taking a break. So we're actually taking a break here from, if we go to the next page, from 10:10 to 10:20, there's a break, and the financial update will be from 10:20 to 11 o'clock. So wanted to let you know we weren't forcing you to all stay in your seats for 3.5 hours straight. So if we can go to the next slide. What we're going to be doing today is going over the strategic plan dashboard and the metrics, because this is what we promised you that we would do. So if we can go to the next slide. Okay, we're there. So we'll go over how the implementation is going, some updates to the plan, and then review the dashboard and spend a bit of time on the metrics. So the next slide, please. So as far as the implementation, all of our departments are pretty much done with creating their own internal work plans to support the goals. And we've developed tasks under each key tactic. Every task has an owner assigned to it. And after today's discussion with you all and buy-in on the metrics, we'll continue working towards this. So everyone has been involved in the strategic plan. Everyone has a part in it and understands their role. So that was one of my key objectives, and one of your key objectives from me from last year is to make sure that everyone understood the plan and how everyone fits in and how we're all working together and rowing in the same direction. So if we go to the next slide, as we were implementing it, we realized that there were some things that were missing from the original goals and key tactics that we first put together. And so we revised some of those, and that is in your packet. So we will not be going over that today, but the red line changes to the departmental goals and to the key tactics that were either revised or added were in your packet. So if people have questions about that, I'm happy to answer those, but we will not spend time on that this morning. What we do want to spend time on, and that's the next slide, is the strategic plan dashboard. So we've been working on metrics for the organization as a whole and for each department. And I'll start this off and then I'll turn it over to each director to describe the dashboards for their department. So if we go to the next slide, the dashboard is basically a fairly simple dashboard here. And we have the main organizational priorities, and then it's broken out into 6 departmental areas. So, and we will go in depth into each of these this morning. So the next slide is the organizational priorities. And this one has our 2 main ones, which is to be 100% renewable energy on a 24/7 basis by 2025. And we are measuring that right now by looking at the average hourly renewable penetration. What is the average percent of load served by renewables in each hour of the year at this point? Right now we're at 47%. And so our goal is to be at 100% in every hour. And then the other is to help the county reduce its overall greenhouse gas emissions in order for the county to meet its 2045 goal to be 0 carbon. And so we will get the countywide total GHG emissions and then note how we're doing on reducing those. If we go to the next slide, we'll look at building energy use, vehicle use, and other point source data to report out on this. We will be working as PCE on the building energy use and the vehicle use in terms of getting people into electric vehicles. So any questions so far on what we've put together here? And then It may make sense to go through the whole thing and then have your questions.
Why don't we do that? Yes.
Okay. So, so the first department we get to is Power Resources. Next slide. So I will turn this over to Siobhan.
Great, thank you. Good morning, everyone. So we've set out 4 metrics for Power Resources. The first is renewable content, and this is measured on an annual basis, and we're measuring it as the % of our Eco Plus renewable energy that's served by renewable energy. Obviously, Eco 100 is already 100% renewable. And so in 2019, this was 52%. And then the second one we're looking at is our emissions factor. So this is pounds of greenhouse gas emissions per megawatt hour. And in 2019, this was 94. Starting in 2020, we will be reporting this based on the CEC power source disclosure reporting requirements. So they have a specific way for us to calculate this starting for our 2020 emissions. The third one is new capacity statewide. So this is a % of our load that's served by newly constructed resources. For example, the Wright project. In 2019, this was 0 because Wright started operating in January 2020. So for 2020, we expect this to be about 14%. And then the final one is local resources. So how many megawatts of new resources were built in San Mateo County? So our goal for that is 20 by 2025. This was 0 last year. Thank you. When we go to the next slide, has the definitions that I just walked through. And then we can move on to the next.
So we'll turn to Joe for public policy.
Good morning, everybody. These are the metrics we laid out to look at how we're doing in public policy. They are qualitative metrics, since the work we do is really not easily put into metrics. But the first one we looked at was PCIA containment. It's not actually a high-level feature of the public policy metrics, but we felt that the PCIA is so important to the agency for our business model and success that we wanted to have a separate metric identifying how we do each year in controlling the PCIA and engaging on it to achieve a positive outcome. Then obviously we have legislative impact, which is how are we doing at the legislature in engaging on bills and advancing PCEs needs at the legislature. Regulatory impact, we have a number of qualitative metrics we'll be using to judge how we do in the regulatory space across all of the topics that we work on. Coalition building is obviously an important part of both regulatory and legislative activity, but because it is such a fundamental metric, we felt, again, we would have a separate metric for it, looking at how we go about our coalition building and assessing each year, how good of a job we did on it. And then lastly, because it is such an important factor in our overall legislative and regulatory activities for fostering CCA growth, where we have facilities, we decided that we wanted a metric on that too, so that the board would have insight into how the public policy team feels we're doing fostering CCA growth. If you could go to the next slide, you can see a little more detail on I thought maybe that was me. These are going to be qualitative assessments. We'll rank our efforts across all of the sub-metrics on a scale of 1 to 5. We'll average them up, and then we'll use that to determine the high, medium, and low scores you saw in the prior slide. Thank you. Next slide, please. I think that's Raphael.
So now we'll go to Raphael. I see some hands up. Jeff, do you want to just wait on those, or?
I see hands up. We'll take questions at the very end of this. I just want to keep moving right now. Thanks.
Okay, so we'll go to Raphael now on community energy programs.
Hello, good morning, directors. As you might imagine, on community energy, we are not lacking for numbers. Our challenge here is to identify numbers that are both meaningful and consolidated into metrics that can be useful. So we have identified 5 metrics. I should flag here that there are a couple of variances from what has been previously discussed with the strategic planning subcommittee, and in fact also one variance with your packet, and I'll explain those. A couple of these metrics are quite straightforward. So EV charging ports installed and electric appliances installed. Those are our flagship programs. And these are direct unit counts out of those programs for existing buildings. So that's pretty straightforward. Low income funds for low income is also fairly straightforward, but some explanation there. There is subtlety and some complexity associated with greenhouse gas numbers, and that's where I'm going to spend most of my time here in the discussion. Next slide, please. So focusing first on transportation, we are going to be adding the estimated greenhouse gas reductions associated with each year by totaling up electric vehicles that have been put into service as a result of our incentives, number one. Number two, the projected utilization and greenhouse gas benefit of EV chargers. I'll walk through that in more detail. And then also utilization of EV chargers installed due to the REACH codes. And what we will be using, or what we are proposing here to use, is a 1-year average of emissions reductions based on a 10-year projection. And the reason that we are using a projection first is to get that 1-year average is that the number of electric vehicles in the county goes up over time. And as a consequence, the utilization on chargers will also go up over time. Again, I'll talk that through here in a moment. We do assume zero greenhouse gas content based on the annualized greenhouse gas content of our the electricity that we will be providing starting in 2021. And as I mentioned, these are we use actual unit counts of what a given year has put into service, but there's a projection associated with those actual unit counts. Next slide. So here's a hypothetical matrix of what we would be counting for transportation. So again, electric vehicles on the far left side, let's say we incentivize 600 electric vehicles. We estimate the mileage that those vehicles will use on an annual basis and total gallons of gas saved. That presumes certain assumptions about the comparative gas vehicle that would otherwise have been purchased. And out of that, we derive an estimate for the greenhouse gases saved. We will be hopefully rolling out a ride-hailing electrification program. That's the next column here. So those are also vehicles that are being put into service. And then the last 3 columns show EV charging, estimated unit counts, and how much gallons of gas are saved, and then the CO2 benefit out of these. I should note that some may ask, you know, are we double counting the electric vehicles and the chargers? And it's important to understand here that we have many, many more electric vehicles than we're actually helping putting into service. So currently we have about 25,000 plus vehicles in the county, and only a very small percentage of those are ones that we put incentives on. And in addition, we have a lot of inbound traffic, particularly for workplace charging under normal circumstances. And as a result of these considerations, we have determined that double counting is not, at least at this point, a major issue. And we've also discussed this with the Air Quality Management District, and they have taken the same approach. In fact, you know, it was on their guidance that we ended up taking this approach. Next slide, please. Buildings, similarly on buildings, this is also what we would describe as a roll-up number, as with transportation, where we're rolling up the emissions benefit from multiple sets of activities. So the first being reach code impact. So the emissions benefit from buildings constructed under the reach codes as compared to the state code. And this is very important, and I'll explain that in more detail in a moment. Next, the expected use of appliances that received incentives and were put into service. And then here again, a 1-year average based on a 10-year projection. Next slide. So I'm going to walk through the reach code hypothetical, because here's where the greatest complexity is on the greenhouse gas calculations. Assuming a hypothetical cities, let's say, for example, Redwood City, which just adopted its reach codes, and thank you and congratulations to Redwood City. So if the code went into place in 2020, then what we will do is estimate the amount of construction that will take place in that city over time each year. So here what we're seeing is the code went into place in 2020, but no buildings are actually built under the code yet. 2021, 2022, 2023, we start seeing buildings being built, and this is in number of residential units. Commercial is a somewhat different calculation, but analogous. And so we used a 10-year historical average to estimate how much construction may occur in the city. And we total up the buildings for each year, estimate the CO2 benefits for each year, and then how much CO2 will be saved. And you'll notice each year, the amount of CO2, the far right column, goes up because there are now more residential units that have been built under that new code. Next. Now, the state code also improves at some point. Here in 2023, we can estimate some improvement. We don't know exactly what that's going to look like. The discussions that we've been involved in suggest that the code will improve, but not be 100% electric. Next. So what we will do here is estimate the, again, continued construction. Again, this is based on historical average, and we will start totaling the residential units that are constructed under the REACH code, but with a new state code. And so what you're seeing here in the second column is on the number on the left is the total number of residential units that were built in the first 3 years. And then the second number in the second 3 years, which have the new state code as the new baseline. The third column shows the estimated CO2 benefit out of each residential unit using the new state code as a baseline. Those are the number 2s, and the 4s are the baseline from the previous 3 years, and then the emissions benefit each year associated with each round of construction in the final column. Next. Then we have a new state code, 2026, which we assume here will be all electric. Next. Now, we don't derive any additional benefit from construction in those subsequent 3 years, but we still derive benefit from the buildings that were built under the REACH codes with the previous state code baselines. So we no longer count additional construction, but we still get emissions benefit from the previous construction. So from out of this, we estimate, again, for this hypothetical city, 34,000 metric tons of CO2 benefit over 10 years. And then from this, we can derive an estimated annual number of 3,400, just over 3,400 metric tons per year. Next. So Actually, maybe I should pause for questions since there's quite a bit of complexity there.
I think we're doing questions at the end.
Okay, all right. So then from here, the next metrics are fairly straightforward. EV charging ports installed. This is primarily in existing construction with our flagship EV Ready program. And then electric appliances installed. Again, same thing, existing construction. And we're using annual totals here for and accumulating the emissions benefit out of those appliances. And then the funds for low income are an aggregation across our workforce and low income specific programs. And this is both for community energy and out of the resilience programs. So what we're looking here for is to estimate the investment for underserved communities. And with that, I think we can go to the next slide, please.
So now we'll hear from KJ for marketing.
Good morning, everybody. So this is for marketing, community relations, and customer care. The main metrics that we're looking at here are participation rate, and that's defined as the percentage of eligible accounts in the service territory who are participating in Peninsula Clean Energy at the end of the fiscal year. In fact, all of these metrics are fiscal year related. Each of the 6 groups of metrics plus the overall metrics that you're hearing about, some are related to the fiscal year and some are related to the calendar year. These are fiscal year related. Currently, the participation rate at the end of the fiscal year was 97%, which is really quite good. And that remains our target for 2025. There are lots of things that could happen to make that go up and down. We're hoping to keep that as at least at 97%. The next metric is our aided awareness, and what aided awareness means is in response to a survey, which we will do on an annual basis, we'll continue to do on an annual basis, what is the percentage of customers in our service territory who can pick out Peninsula Clean Energy from a list as among the electricity providers in the territory. The favorability rating is the percentage of those who are aware who then rate Peninsula Clean Energy favorably. The most recent survey, and you'll be hearing more about that in a little bit, resulted in 63% of those customers who were aware viewing Peninsula Clean Energy as somewhat or very favorably. And then the next couple of metrics are based upon an assessment of engagement. And these are more qualitative, similar in some ways to what Joe was talking about with regard to the public policy and legislative metrics. We are in the process of developing specific rubrics here that look at 3 different levels of engagement, and this same concept is used for both key accounts and for residential and small and medium businesses. And there are 3 levels of engagement. One is high engagement, where the investment of time and resources is high. So someone buys a vehicle, someone engages in installing EV charging stations in a workplace, that kind of thing, that would be high. A medium engagement would be a significant investment of resources, for example, but not necessarily an outlay of funds. And then low engagement would be very low engagement activities that might be things like checking something on our website, participating in a webinar, those kinds of things. Next slide, please. And this is a written description of everything that I just said. That's all I've got.
Thanks, KJ. And all of this is in your packet. So you should be able to follow along in your packets as well. So we'll go next to Andy for finance.
Great, thanks. I'll be quick. The first metric is days cash on hand. It says unrestricted, and just to be clear, unrestricted has a GAAP, audited financial, meaning we've extended that definition to be something that's not part of our GAAP financial statements, but is commitments by the board for community programs. The second is a credit rating. We already have a credit rating with Fitch and Moody's, but our target long-term in the next few years is to get one or both of those to an A level. Our change in that position is a little bit harder to put a metric around, but the 2020 baseline is what our audited financials will likely show when they're done. And we want to be positive, changing that position in each of the, or by 2025. And as you know, and we'll go through in a board to depth a little later today, the budget and projection shows that we may have a couple of down years in the next few years. Our investment performance, we have not yet settled on a metric. Part of that's because the board recently approved our managing our investments on an ESG basis, so environmental, social, and governmental focus. And we have not yet settled on metrics for how we would, what we'd measure against. And then lastly is one that crosses departments and directors in the organization around the average cost of energy, but it's a key metric for our managing our financial performance. And this looks at all costs that are reported publicly for cost of energy and divides by our build load. And you can see that we're hoping and expecting it not to change much over the next 4 years. And next slide basically goes through what I just said.
We'll go to the next slide. The last area is organizational governance, organizational excellence, and I'll run through these. The first one is governance, and so that's really how the board is doing and how you all are doing. So it's coming up with succession processes for board members and alternates, having quality orientation for new board members and CAC members, and then board member support for the organization. And so right now we feel that that's high and we want to keep that high. The second is staff satisfaction, and that's going to be, some of these are obviously qualitative. All of these are kind of qualitative in this area. So for staff satisfaction, it would be looking at doing annual surveys of our staff to make sure that people are satisfied, looking at our rate of turnover, making sure that everyone is getting professional development and moving towards their career goals, making sure that our benefits are competitive with other organizations and things like that. The next area is our impact on innovation, since that is one of the key things that we want to be working on. So it would be looking at how are we doing in terms of doing innovative projects, doing pilots, how are we moving towards improving what the clean energy industry as a whole wants to achieve through the innovation that we're trying to do in our work. The next is organizational policies, and this focuses on two policies in particular, our sustainable workforce policy and our ethical vendor standards policies, and making sure that we're making progress towards the goals of each of those policies. And then the last one is technology and systems, making sure that internally we have the types of systems we need to do the analysis we need for our energy procurement, our risk management, our business processes, programs, and customer insights. And then also making sure that we have the appropriate privacy, security, and accuracy in all of those systems. So right now we rank the first four as high, and we put the last one at medium because we're still in the process of putting those systems together, and that's where we're at. So that's the end of this presentation. So Jeff, we'd be ready to have questions and further comment at this point.
Okay, so thanks everyone. I see the hands up. Thank you for your patience. I wanted to make sure that you got the overview of the whole dashboard before we went into sections. What I'd like to do now is go back to the individual sections and we can have a discussion around each of them. So if Shayna could take us back to the dashboard slide for power resources. I think it was slide maybe 14 or so. It was Siobhan's. There we go. Let's take questions specifically around this. I see Rick, Wayne, and Pradeep's hands up right now. Do any of you have specific questions around the power resources section? Rick?
Yeah, I do. So should I go?
Yes, please.
Okay, so first, I just want to say, I think that the focus on measurement throughout all of these sections is absolutely terrific. It's exactly the right thing to be doing. It's what we need. We really haven't discussed that as clearly before. I think it's a result of the strategic plan, and I feel very proud of staff and the organization for this focus. The one comment I have on the power resources area is it's a big jump from going to 2019 to 2025, all right? I mean, we all know this is gonna be tough as we increase the renewable content from 52% up to 100%. And the comment is that I think it would be wise for us to set interim goals rather than just look at that jump. And that's obviously going to take time. I'm not suggesting we do that now, but I think that, you know, we should do that. I don't have a judgment as to whether we should do it every single year, but over these next 4 years, I think a couple interim goals at least would be important, and maybe we should do it every year, but I think that's something staff should think about. And maybe you already have, but that's my comment.
Thanks, Rick. I will point out in the staff report there are annual interim targets for the renewables on this is page 13 of the agenda packet. But I think you're right. I agree with you on that. Pradeep, did you have a question about the power resources section?
No, not on this.
Okay. Any other questions about power resources right now? And remember to use the raise hand just because I cannot see all your screens at once.
Yeah, thank you. Jeff, can I talk?
Go ahead, Ray. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, I just want to thank staff for the presentation. It's very good summaries. But as an engineer, I wonder later if we can get some numbers to give us some sort of magnitude of what we're looking at. Just something that just helps me. But I do like the summary because it really makes it a very quick presentation. So Sabine, on page 13, which we're looking at, can you, the new capacity statewide percentage target, is that the coalition's target, or is that something we want to do? And if it's something we want to do, how do we make a dent into that number in coordination with the other CCAs? Thank you.
Jeff, I can jump in if that's helpful.
Yeah. I think it was directed at you, yes.
The new capacity statewide target, that's a PCE specific target, and it's one that we had initially set for ourselves in the strategic IRP we published in early 2018, I think. So that would be to build enough new resources, such as the Wright Solar Project or the Mustang Project, which will come on later this year, to meet 50% of our load from those new types of resources.
So this is our contribution to the statewide number, or is this just like a based on our own baseline? Because it seems like our baseline should be a little higher because we already invested into a solar farm.
So 50% is our target. In 2019, Wright was not operating, which is why the number is 0. For 2020, we'll have Wright for the whole year, and so our number should be about 14%. Wright's generation is approximately 14% of our load, and then we'll add Mustang on in November of this year. So for 2021, we should see this number go up to about 20-ish%. And then we have a couple other PPAs that are in the works right now.
Okay, and then the other thing, this is a question for you and the board, just to ponder. is are we interested in investing in research and funding investment in technology that would help us get to that number?
Short answer, yes. The questions, I think the details around that are one of the important questions I think we're all going to be talking about going forward, but it's probably an entire separate topic, but thanks. I think,
yeah, absolutely.
I
Okay,
think
I'm done.
I think it's a really important point. It's just, yeah.
And I think that would fall in the innovation area where we're looking at new technologies and what should we be investing in. But it's definitely an area of focus.
Okay, thanks, Wayne. Dave, I see your hand up. Or do you have a question about power resources?
Yeah, maybe a comment and a quick question.
Please.
I'm really happy to see that we're calling out development of local resources as one of our key goals in the power resource section. You know, when we started PCE, we really emphasized that quite a bit, and you know, for various reasons, we kind of couldn't focus on that initially. So I really like that we're calling it out. And so basically, we're trying to add 4 megawatts a year. And how difficult is that going to be? I don't have a sense for the scope of that goal, adding 4 megawatts each year.
Yeah, I think, Dave, it's been slow to start up, but I think once we have programs started, it'll get easier. The Sunrun program that we approved earlier this year has a target between 1 and 11 megawatts.
Mm-hmm.
We are also working on a strategic plan around DERs for whether 20 megawatts is the right number and how do we actually get to that number, or whether we should be more aggressive. I think 20 megawatts is a very reasonable number.
Yeah, if I remember, I think we said it right in the very beginning. So I'd be open to a larger number if that's feasible. But in any event, I'm glad to see the organization turn more focus to this. Thank you.
I'll add one thought to that, which is that, I mean, the 20 megawatts of local resources probably optimally is things we don't own, like the Sunrun batteries that are going in. But I think EV batteries, especially as we start trying to do vehicle to grid integration of EVs, is going to, I think the nominal or the value of that is going to go up significantly, and I think it's going to make a significant contribution to this 20 megawatt goal or whatever that number ends up being. But it's a good point, Dave. I see a hand that looks like it's from the public. I'm going to ask you to wait until the end just so we can get board comments throughout this section. So thank you for your patience again. Let's move on to public policy. Does anyone have any comments specifically on public policy? Pradeep, I think you had your hand up during Joe's talk, so go ahead.
Correct. Jeff, I have one question for Joe and then overall strategic planning later on at the end, if you will. So
Sure.
For Joe, I was asking the question, many of these public policy and legislative efforts are based on our coordination with CalCCA because their positions on many different bills and different aspects of legal situations regarding PCIe, etc., have been differing from PCE. So I would like to know a little bit more about how we are going to be coordinating to influence the CalCCA positions on these options in a much more effective way rather than trying to go always as a supplementary input into the process.
Certainly happy to discuss that. The public policy team, we have 4 members, and we are all heavily integrated into CalCCA's overall efforts. For example, Jeremy Wayan is one of the key leads at CalCCA on resource adequacy efforts. Doug Karpa is the key lead at CalCCA on IRP efforts, the integrated resource planning process. Jeremy also is working, and while we have our own, for example, where we do coordinate, where we have our own processes is in transportation electrification. So we have filed separately from other CCAs on that topic, but we do collaborate with them, share thoughts and comments. We just wanted to ensure there that we have sort of a separate voice in that particular area, since it's such a heavy programmatic effort for PCE. But I could go on with examples, but the team does collaborate very closely with CalCCA. We are actually thought leaders in a lot of CalCCA's efforts. For example, I'm leading or working with a team. I'm not leading it, but CalCCA is, but I'm part of a committee that's working on PCIA. So we meet every week for 2 hours to collaborate and coordinate on CalCCA's messages there. And then of course we disseminate those messages out to the other CCAs so we're all aligned. But that is part of what we look at within our regulatory impact section when we want to grade that is, you know, how much are we interacting with CalCCA, an assessment of how much our thought leadership is impacting CalCCA's efforts, because you're correct, they are very important, or they, you know, CalCCA is a very important voice in California, right? I mean, we have to be in collaboration with them in order to have our views reflected in the discussion that's going on across the state. So our team does heavily engage with them across basically all of our key programmatic efforts, RA, resource adequacy, integrated resources planning, and a number of other dockets. And of course, like I said, I'm on the PCIA. So,
thank you, Joe.
Yeah, so I just want to, you know, assure you that we are, you know, thought leaders in that organization, and we are seen as go-to thought leaders in that organization. You know, PCE has made a major commitment in the public policy space, hiring on, you know, 4 very senior people to lead those efforts. And I think that is reflected in, you know, the work CalCCA is doing.
Thank you, Joe. I just wanted to know that I got a little bit of more information now since you explained it to me, and I'm so happy that you're taking lead on that. And I like to continue to make sure that we at PCE would constitute a big part of what CalCCA recommends. And please report to the board if there's any problems or issues coming up, as you can see. Thank you.
Well, one thing to note that we are doing to surface this particular effort on our work with CalCCA is you'll notice every now and then in the, you know, our legislative regulatory report, we will talk about who is leading what efforts at CalCCA for just a few sentences. So the board, you know, one, it helps us do this yearly reporting, but I think we felt it was important for the board to know, you know, like when Doug Carpa is leading the collaboration efforts with the environmental parties on behalf of CalCCA, we put that in our memo so that you all are aware of those thought leadership efforts, even though they're sort of summarily reported in this dashboard. We also want monthly for the board to know where we're at. So certainly if you would like, I can think about ways to highlight that work more if it's an area of focus for you in our report.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah,
Take
I
that
appreciate
offline.
Yeah,
Should probably
We're
get
running
them.
short on time.
Yeah, agreed. Wayne, you had a comment on public policy?
Yes, first of all, Joe, I just really thank you for your work. This is such a hard area to measure, and I appreciate your chart and your goals. To help us to understand where we are, can we get a monthly thing on your report, Jan, or something that has kind of like a thermometer type of thing that tells us if we're like falling behind or I mean, we fall behind because of some legislation or something that hits us or something like that. That way we can make sure we have the right resources in the right places. So this, you know, this is a very subjective area because things can change very quickly. And so to have this measurement, it's still nebulous, even though it's a great first step forward. But I'd like to see some sort of like a Gantt chart, measure what we want to be, where's the, you know, our CCAs are at, and where's our participation, you know, is it red, is it green, you know, where is it? So I kind of like to see a monthly, you know, chart or something that helps us see a quick summary of where we're at. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Wayne. Yeah, we are at 9:31, so I was worried that this was we're gonna have a hard time having an in-depth discussion in our allotted time. I want to move quickly through these, take other quick questions, and maybe things that can be parked offline for future discussion. Let's move on to programs. Does anyone have any sort of brief comments on programs for Raphael or the team?
Sorry,
Go ahead.
I do. Can I? I'm sorry. I don't mean to take up all the conversation and holding me back. So, Raphael, I just have a quick question. Did did we coordinate with the ABAG in terms of their Plan Bay Area 2050?
We're certainly aware of Plan Bay Area. We have not been coordinating directly with MTC. Certainly there may be opportunities there that has a heavy land use and broader transportation emphasis. So it differs a little bit from our focus, but certainly we could explore collaboration, yes.
Thank you. Pradeep, another comment on programs?
Yeah, this is the comment I wanted to make as an overall strategic position. I think that Raphael's programs are great and they are really an input into reaching into our communities. But also last week I saw that the megawatt hour cost of at the peak time was going up as much as $1,000 a megawatt hour. And also our commitment to have 24/7 coincident generation of 100% renewable energy made me think that it seems like our total power resource base based on new energy resource is not going to be, at least economically, very convenient to meet those goals, given the situations with our loads and temperatures and climate changes. So I think it'll be very necessary for our demand side picture to emerge and become more important and meeting our resource needs. By demand side, I mean there are certain things that can be done with the demand of electricity at a given time to reduce the demand rather than bring up the new electrons to meet that demand. This is called in our electrical engineering and utility engineering as demand side management. So I think many of the programs that Raphael is doing right now do not have a content or dimension or demand side management aspect. I would like to see the board and Jen think seriously about including that dimension and making our community programs as a part of strategy to meet our resource requirements of the future, given the problems of economics and reliability that we are talking about. So that was a general comment, but I like to wanted to emphasize that Raphael's programs are a good introduction into community thinking, but also we need to tie it up with our overall goal of the PCE of reliability and clean energy. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Pradeep. We're totally aware of that. And when we put together our contracts for installing EV chargers and things like that, we try to make sure that we have that capability in the future to be able to manage the charging to meet our 24/7 goals. But it's hard, and the impact actually from demand side management can be pretty small to start, but it's definitely something we're focusing on.
Thank you.
Okay, Rick, go ahead.
Okay, very quick question. Pradeep, in looking at the data for new buildings, because your measurements have a lot to do with the new buildings that come in under the REACH codes, for example, and that kind of data, are you estimating on those buildings as we go forward year by year, or are you actually able to get real data so that, you know, it's not just an estimate, but it's actually specific data?
I'm sorry, I think Director DeGolia, is the question directed to me?
Yeah, sorry, Raphael. It is directed to you.
Yeah, today, we do not have a direct line to actual construction data within each city. So we are reliant at this moment on estimates and using building permit estimates that are nationally reported. In the case of residential, there's less good data on commercial. So in all of these cases, we will be working continuously to improve the quality of the data that we receive and try to move towards more an actuals-based data collection. But a lot of this data is heavily distributed and hard to get.
Yeah, that's interesting. That might be a very interesting area for us to look at helping the county with, because certainly as the county wishes to accurately measure greenhouse gas emissions reductions, getting real-time data rather than using a national estimate is going to be
Yes,
extremely valuable.
absolutely.
Okay. Thank you, Rick. Okay, we're past time on this one. Our next two sections were marketing and finance. We're actually going to hear from KJ and Andy in the next two sections of the retreat. So I'd like to want to bypass those. And the last one's governance. And I want to cut this off, but I want to encourage people, if you have questions about this, we're going to come back to this dashboard many, many times over the coming years, months and years. So I will encourage people to sort of send individual questions to staff based on this dashboard. I think it's a great place to start organizing some of these conversations. So I will thank everyone. Indulge me in sort of moving forward. I see Carlos's hand up and then Jennifer's hands up.
I'm sorry, the question was for Rafael. You want to move on, so that's fine. I'll talk to him offline. Thanks.
Thank you, Carlos. Jennifer, did you want to make a comment here?
Yeah, you did mention that there was a public comment waiting, and
yeah.
I just wanted to make sure that we remembered that.
That my last point was going to be, I was going to come back to the public hand that was raised from Jay Donahue. And I do want to take that comment. So we'll take that and then we'll move on. If Jay Donahue wants to.
Sure, yeah. Sorry if this is the wrong format.
No, not at all. Go ahead.
Technologies. I have a micro cogeneration system in my house. And that's, been interesting to kind of play with and try to deal with PG&E. And I didn't know how to, get more information and work with you all to explore that as options for, how I optimize the system, what I do to help you all.
Great, thank you for asking that. Do you have, I'm going to suggest with staff's permission that you contact Rafael directly, probably the best person to start that conversation.
Okay.
And Rafael, your email address is on our website, correct?
I'm at rreyes@peninsulacleanenergy.com.
Great, thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, thanks everyone. And again, please feel free to direct questions to staff, but I think we need to move on to marketing. So if KJ is ready to present on our market research results, why don't you go ahead?
Hello again. So I am going to present just the top line results and the highlights of the market research that is provided in a little bit more detail in your packet. There's a memo in there that has a lot more details. But first, before I get into the results, I want to just set the table here on why are we doing this research. The reason we do this is because we want to assess how receptive our residents will be to messages that encourage them to take actions, particularly around things like getting involved in certain of our programs. And secondly, we wanted to get some guidance on developing the programs and on communicating persuasively about those programs. Next slide, please. The specific objectives of this research were to look at awareness and perception among San Mateo County residents about the Peninsula Clean Energy brand, and also about the benefits and the obstacles to adoption and the purchase interest in electric vehicles, a key part of our investment in community programs, and also in electric homes, specifically those end uses that have historically been fueled by natural gas. Next slide, please. So our approach was we did a random sample of all households in San Mateo County, and we sent a letter of invitation to 35,000 residents. These were both customers and non-customers of Peninsula Clean Energy. We sent this letter under the letterhead of the San Mateo County Office of Sustainability. And I want to point out that red mark at the bottom, the red text at the bottom here. It was kind of a double-edged sword. The advantage of sending it out under the umbrella of the San Mateo County OOS was that it gave us the opportunity to assess unaided awareness. In other words, if we asked the respondents, who is your electricity provider, or from whom can you provide electricity, or can you purchase electricity within the county? How many of them would say Peninsula Clean Energy among their list of providers? So it gave us that advantage, but it also likely introduced some level of pro-environmental bias into the sample, because when someone gets a letter that comes from the Office of Sustainability and they're environmentally focused, they're probably more likely to engage in providing input. So there's probably a little bit of bias there. We don't know exactly how much. We had an extraordinarily high response rate. This response rate of 8.3% is much, much higher than you would expect to get from this sort of survey. And in part, that was probably because This was early on in the shelter in place, and people may have been looking for something to do and found the 19-minute online survey to be entertaining. So this was offered in multiple languages: English, Spanish, Mandarin, Tagalog. Most people, the vast majority of respondents, took the survey in English. Next slide, please. We normalized the sample, and this was, when I say we, I'm referring to Heiner and Partners, which is a very reputable, strong methodologically market research services firm, has done a lot of work in the energy field. So they normalized the sample to better reflect our population, specifically the census demographics for ethnic proportions. And they also downsampled it so that we had a percentage of respondents owning EVs, which matched with data that was known by us from DMV registrations. This resulted in a sample of 2,261 residents, which is a very robust sample, providing a confidence level at a 95% confidence level, a margin of error plus or minus 2 points. Obviously, that's slightly higher if you get down into subgroups and you only have 700 respondents, but it's still quite strong. The surveys were completed between April 7th and the 29th. Next slide, please. And next slide. So first, I'm going to talk about general brand awareness and perception. There was a total awareness of 34%, which was very similar to the previous study that was done in January of 2019, not statistically significantly different from that total awareness. Of that, 11% were able to say spontaneously without prompting that Peninsula Clean Energy was an energy provider, an electricity provider. Of those who were aware, and I mentioned this when we looked at the dashboard, those who are aware of Peninsula Clean Energy, 63% had a very favorable perception, and a third really weren't sure. So the unfavorable was quite small at 4%. The brand perceptions, as you'll see in the next couple of slides, are really well aligned with our mission and our messaging. The top priority when you ask the residents what is the most important thing about an electricity provider is lower rates. It's very clearly stronger than any of the other attributes. And this last point is one about environmental supportiveness, or basically 85% of respondents were supportive of the community's efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. That's a very strong alignment with our mission. Next slide, please. We asked this question about brand perceptions, and we provided a list of statements that you can see listed down the left here. And the green shows the percentage of respondents who thought that statement was true. The bright orange pink color thought the statement was false, and the gray is gray areas where they're just not sure. And so you can see the top messages here of, we're working to improve the environment, we're providing cleaner energy, we have programs that help you to be greener, we're a reliable provider of electricity. All those were perceived as true by a majority of customers. So that's well aligned with what we're doing. When you look at some of the other statements, like whether it's a public agency or it's innovative, charges lower rates, et cetera, the majority, roughly half or more of the respondents, were just not sure about those things. Of greatest interest to me here on this chart is that 16%, in that part where it says charges lower rates than PG&E, 16% of the respondents thought that that was false. And almost half were not sure whether we charge lower rates than PG&E, and that's going to be important when we go to one of the next slides, but don't go there quite yet. On the question of whether the agency is a division or a branch of PG&E, 45% just weren't sure, but encouragingly, 45% felt that that was a false statement, and that's good. Next slide, please. When we asked the respondents to rate their priorities, number 1, number 2, and number 3 out of a list of priorities, and you can see here the dark green are the percentage of the respondents who rated that factor number 1. You can see that lower electricity rates far and away is the most important. It was ranked either 1, 2, or 3 by 3/4 of the respondents. And in fact, half the respondents rated it their number 1 priority. Everything else beyond that is much lower priority. When someone is asked, when a respondent is asked about their energy provider or their electricity provider, and we are positioned a little bit differently than that, because we are positioned in a lot of ways, as you saw from one of the earlier slides, as an organization that is working to improve the environment, is providing programs in that regard, and is providing clean energy. So I thought was quite interesting. Next slide, please. So the implications here for the brand is that our brand awareness still has plenty of upside for improvement, because we only are at 34%. So 2/3 are not aware that we are an electricity provider. But the perceptions are really quite favorable among those people who are aware of Peninsula Clean Energy. There is clearly improvement needed on the perception of lower cost electricity, which we consistently provide. And of course, as we all know, that's a somewhat confusing message when someone is looking at their bill. Nonetheless, we need improvement there. And then what we found when we did this survey and cross-tabulated by different subsegments was that our metrics in this regard were much stronger among those who identified as white and who owned their own homes. So we have an opportunity to improve awareness and favorability among other segments. Next slide, please. Moving on to the section around electric vehicles. Next slide, please. The objectives here were really to understand the awareness and perception of residents about EVs, and to understand what they perceive as benefits, what they perceive as motivations to adopt, and obstacles to adopt, and how interested they are in actually purchasing electric vehicles. These survey questions were not presented to the entire sample. They were presented just to those respondents who were both licensed drivers and were a primary decision maker for vehicle purchases. Next slide, please. This is a persuasion monitor, and this is a methodology that was developed by Heiner and Partners, our research provider here. And basically the idea here is to take a look at how the population progresses across this sort of spectrum, from being aware of a technology or a solution to familiar, favorable, actually considering using that technology or solution, and then actually adopting it. So you can see here that the awareness and the favorability of electric vehicles is extremely strong. That's really quite favorable. And then when you look at this section on would consider, the respondents were asked to rate on a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 is extremely likely that they would consider and 1 is extremely unlikely. This shows just those who rated 8, 9, or 10 on that scale of 10. And that comes out to over half of the respondents would consider an electric vehicle when they make their next purchase. And that lumps together all forms of electric vehicles. What's remarkable about this slide is that where you see that arrow dropping from the 94% down to the 43%, that is quite a cliff. So people are aware of EVs, they see them favorably, they'd consider them, but they're sort of feeling a little bit uncomfortable. Maybe they're not familiar enough with them, and that represents a real opportunity for us. Next slide, please. So we asked, what kinds of things maybe they weren't familiar with, so that we could direct some of our efforts. And we provided a list of statements here that we asked the respondents to agree strongly, agree somewhat, disagree. And you can see the dark green is the percentage of respondents who agreed strongly with these statements. So most of the respondents, they're very high percentages, agree with these factual statements about EVs. But they're less clear on the bottom 3. That little bracket should really be on the bottom 3 statements there, being that most new vehicles can go 200 miles on a single charge, that it costs less to drive and maintain an EV than a standard gas-powered vehicle, and that EVs can be plugged into a standard outlet. So those present real opportunities for us in terms of specific areas. And next slide, you'll see that when we look at the motivators and the barriers, one of the top issues remains the miles per charge. Now on these slides, the darker color is those respondents who plan to buy a new vehicle the next time, and the lighter shade is those who plan to buy a used vehicle. So when we look at the chart on the left, which is about the motivators, you can see pricing of the vehicle. It may be that EVs are still perceived as being at a premium over gas-powered vehicles. That is obviously changing in the marketplace. And the second motivator is, does this get enough miles to get me where I need to go? On the barrier side, the range concern still comes up as a high concern. And concerns about whether they can conveniently find charging stations is a concern as well. And coupled with the fact that most people do not realize that you can plug it into a 110 outlet. You might not get a very fast charge, but you can plug it in. That represents an opportunity for education and information as well. What's interesting, one of the things I also found interesting here is when you look at the very bottom of that barriers list and you look at the lifetime of barrier or the lifetime of the battery and the condition of the battery, clearly those who are interested in purchasing a used vehicle are aware of battery degradation over time, probably because they've experienced it with their phones and other devices in the home. Next slide, please. So the implications here are that, you know, there's a great degree of awareness, there's a great degree of favorability. We have very specific opportunities for education around operating costs, charging, and range. There's interesting, I didn't present this in a graph, but 1 in 4 residents, at least as of April, 1 in 4 residents were considering buying a vehicle, whether used or new, in the next year. Now that may have changed since the economic hardships have continued much far longer than most people would have expected back in April. But even with a slightly lower level of consideration regarding a new vehicle, this still presents an opportunity for us to influence vehicle buyers toward EVs, if not this year, in the coming years. Next slide. Moving on to building electrification. Next slide again, please. What we were looking for here is trying to understand the perceptions among residents about all electric homes and specifically about electric appliances and equipment that is used in homes and often fueled by natural gas. And we'd like to get them to move over to electricity. So we were looking at benefits, perceived benefits, interest in adoption, and the intention to electrify their homes. Next slide. So we first asked about what do they value? What's important to you when you're considering an appliance? And the number one things really are cost and comfort. You'll see here in this chart, again, we asked them to rate 1, 2, or 3 in terms of priority, the dark green being the first priority. The energy costs and the efficiency are, I'm guessing, are conflated. So when people think about energy efficiency, they are also often thinking about the cost of operating that appliance, and comfort being, of course, very important. So then we asked them, you know, how did they view electricity versus gas-powered appliances in meeting their needs? Next slide, please. And so here's where we asked which one, was it electric-powered device or a natural gas-powered device? Which one performed better? Were they both about the same, or are you not sure? And so you can see across these various attributes that electricity came out very strong in terms of being viewed as generating lower emissions and indoor air pollution and being a safer technology, a safer fuel source to be using for your appliances. One of the things that's interesting here is that the fuel costs, natural gas, when you look down at that, the 5th one down where it says lower operating costs / fuel costs, natural gas is seen as being less expensive than electricity. This, of course, does not take into account the fact that some electric-powered appliances are more efficient and could therefore end up costing less to operate, even though the fuel source itself may cost a little bit more. So there's some education need there. And then the last thing at the bottom where you see the dramatic blue section, that 71% of the respondents believe that gas works better for cooking. This isn't a surprise to anybody who's participated on REACH code discussions, because that is where a lot of the opposition comes when you're in a city council meeting and members of the public are speaking about their opposition to REACH codes. This is probably because a lot of these respondents see electric powered cooking ranges, cooktops, as being the old-fashioned electric resistance coil. And that is not the modern electric technology for stovetops. Next slide, please. And this is my last slide, which is that the implications here are that we have the opportunity to add to the consumer priorities, which, as I noted, were around cost and comfort, add to those safety, reduced emissions, better, and also health effects of those reduced emissions. And then the fact that there's a widely held belief, and this is particularly true among the upper income respondents, that natural gas works better for cooking, that presents a clear challenge to us. So with that, I'll take any questions if we still have time. Yeah, we do.
We do have time. Thank you. Thanks for this update. This is a really great survey. Wayne has his hand up. Wayne, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, thank you. That's a very good report. So my suggestion for, I understand the whole gas thing. That is a really critical issue. Maybe we can induce a lot of public relations things, show, hire some or partner with some chefs who normally are associated with using gas cooking and demonstrate that we can do a lot of that with electrical cooking. Thank you.
Absolutely, and that is a really good point that I didn't make in here, and I wish I had, so thanks for asking that question, Wayne. So the board approved some months ago a building electrification awareness program, which we did award in July to Gelfand and Partners Architects, and they are working with the New Buildings Institute, the Fishnick Center, which is more formally known as Frontier Energy's Food Service Technology Center, and other key partners. And among the work that's going to be done under that implementation program, it includes tours of electric buildings, recognition of electric buildings, demonstrations of cooking with induction cooktops, and all of those things are still in development right now. And of course, we are a little bit hampered by not being able to do IRL or in real life demonstrations at this moment. But we are looking at other ways of doing video demonstrations and so on. So
this kind of reminds me of the story. I wasn't there, but people were really hesitant in getting on escalators. So there was a lot of, a lot of hesitation. So in the same way, I think that the same hesitation kind of exists here. It's a fear of getting to electric cooking. So I'm thinking more than that. You can actually do like YouTube videos and stuff like that, watching like, ethnic cooks cook with electric, rather than using a wok and gas. You can demonstrate like what you can ask Martin Yang that he's done it on electric. I've seen him do cooking on electric induction hot plates. So
yeah, the interesting thing about Martin Yan, and I know that Jan had a chance to meet him at an event, and he brings an induction hob with him when he does in-person demonstrations, as do a lot of chefs these days, because they can do things like cook rice and boil water really quickly when they're next to their gas device that they're using to demonstrate. So it'd be great if he were doing more of that, and it would be wonderful to engage him in doing more of that with wok cooking. And of course, there are a lot of celebrity chefs such as, Thomas Keller from French Laundry, who has a fully electric kitchen and induction cooktops, et cetera. So.
Yeah, so we can associate it all with Peninsula Clean Energy, reach codes, so people understand that they don't have to give up their taste and texture of cooking by giving up gas. Thanks.
Right, and it's interesting. There's also a local chef who has done a lot of work with Asian cooks on induction cooktops, and one of the things she talks about, which I don't know very much about personally, but she talks about wok hay, which is something that you get when the pan is completely heated up around the outside. And according to this particular chef, most cooks in their homes are not able to create that. It really requires the kind of gas cooking that occurs in restaurants, really high BTU burners.
That's exactly right. So that's the other thing too, restaurants, you're gonna have to address how you're going to get that type of cooking in restaurants.
Exactly.
Thanks, Wayne. Laura's up next. Go ahead, Laura.
KJ, thank you for the report. It was really informative, and I see a lot of opportunity in these responses from the community, so that's great news. From my perspective, I think, the biggest challenge here, besides the ones that you mentioned, are going to be leveraging their interest and awareness, but getting over this idea that, well, they have to pay more upfront that over the long term, there's going to be a savings there. So that's kind of the area that I think is going to be the biggest challenge in terms of trying to convince people how to do that. So there could be opportunity for doing some message testing around that, so that it's convincing and believable. So great job. Thank you.
Thanks, Laura. Rick's got his hand up. Go ahead, Rick.
Thank you. So in San Mateo, we just had a major discussion Monday night, and we actually approved and improved reach codes that we had done last year. We brought them back to improve them. We ended up going all electric on new residential construction, including multifamily, actually, and ADUs. Actually, everything except all affordable buildings, which I really struggled to get. But we did get that improved to a electric preferred model. So that's better than it was. And I have to say, I wish I would have known about the actual difference that the electric appliance makes in efficiency. Because to me, what that means is that to achieve the same goal, yes, you're using electricity, which may, by the kilowatt hour, appear to cost more. Maybe it's a larger part of your electricity bill. But the new appliance is so much more efficient, it costs you less, actually, to do the same function. So I think that's correct. So correct me if I'm wrong there. But I would have used that for sure. But I just want to say that what we're doing with reaching out to cities with reach codes and seeking, and there was a lot of help from an outside group too, a couple of groups headed up by Diane Bailey and some other people. That really helped a lot. So we're on the right track. We need to work on that public perception. And I think we have good insight into how to do that now. So thank you all very much.
The other thing I do want to mention, and it's been in our marketing updates in the board packets recently, is that we are participating as a member of the Building Decarbonization Coalition. And there is a big campaign that is intended to go statewide, although it's slow getting off the starting blocks, which is called the Switch is On. And the idea is switching from gas to electric with a lot of information and rich examples of, the advantages of going to a heat pump water heater, or the advantages of using heat pump space conditioning, where you get your AC for free, as Jeff knows really well. We talked about that before. So there's a lot of other stuff going on that should support this. And congratulations, Rick, on the San Mateo adoption. That's huge.
Yeah, that's great news, Rick. I saw that this week, and I was really happy to see it.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was quite the battle, but we prevailed.
Yes, I'm sure it was.
Yeah.
Okay, I actually don't see any other hands up. Feel free to raise them. If we don't have any more discussion right now, it's 10:05, and I will suggest that we start our 10-minute break now, come back at 10:15, and that way we can actually kind of pre-plan against the future schedule creep that is inevitable. So again, if no hands, we'll take our break now from 10:05. Oh, Tim, go ahead.
Public comment, Jeff.
Yeah, I see it. Tim?
Just a question. It seems that the numbers in terms of the EV adoption in San Mateo County, that the people in the county are ahead of what PCE is planning. If we take that 10% already have an EV and most are considering, then are, let's say, 3,500 chargers in 2025 going to be nearly enough, or are the programs in place? So I'm just not sure if what the PCE sort of role or mandate is in the space, if it's catching up to what's already happening.
Does anyone, Raphael, do you want to answer that?
My apologies, coming off of mute. So it is absolutely true that awareness and interest is very high in the county. There are still significant barriers to access for about half the population, and the EV infrastructure program is intended to substantially address that. So that's one of the main focuses of our efforts. There are still also some considerations in terms of upfront cost, which are points of resistance in terms of actual adoption despite interest. So the incentive program is targeting that issue.
And those 3,500 are or level 3 chargers, the fastest ones. So that doesn't include sort of the tier 1 and tier 2 chargers that people will be putting into their own units or homes along with the EVs that they're buying. So it's Raphael,
And
that right?
maybe I can clarify that slightly. It is true that the incentive program is not doing single family residential, which is fairly straightforward from an infrastructure standpoint. We are doing lower power options in apartments and condominiums, so level 1 and level 2. And then also the overall program does support fast chargers as well, as you stated.
Beg your pardon, yes. Okay. Okay, if there's no other comment, then okay, it's 10:07, so we'll take 10 minutes right now and come back at, let's say 10:15, and we'll try to reconvene. Okay, thank you. See you in 10 minutes. You're probably all glad that I can't walk around your houses telling you to come back to the computer right about now.
We still got a minute.
No, I know.
I'm here, Jeff. I'm just, you don't all need to be watching me eat my breakfast burritos, so I'm just gonna remain off camera.
How true that is. Thank you.
I do.
It's delicious, I must say. My husband made it for me.
You have to bring enough for everyone.
You know what? That is the bummer about not in-person meetings is Donna and the Copenhagen Bakery goodies don't show up.
My cholesterol count thanks you, but yes.
I'm gonna have to have her make and deliver a special delivery to everybody next time.
Wow. Okay. That's
sounds good.
Thanks, Don. I think that must be why I've lost weight during this shelter at home.
No, stop.
I thought that 19 and COVID-19 was the amount of weight I needed to gain while I was sheltering in place. Is that not the case?
Did somebody just say they lost weight in shelter in place?
I have.
That is not fair.
I have two, actually.
Oh my gosh,
I've
you
put on
guys.
10 pounds.
no.
I don't have little kids.
My new office is my kitchen, and it's just too close.
Different when you've got little kids there, Kat, and you've got
Dangerous.
cookies and all those fun things. I try to keep that away now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When the kids go to college, Kat, you just evacuate the refrigerator. It has nothing in it. And then you cheat and eat an entire bag of candy corn instead.
Yeah, they do great things like bringing in potato chips and things that are kind of irresistible.
Hey, Kat, I'm going to call you on a separate note. I want to talk to you about that, the group that's putting together that mobile app, Create Lab.
Okay.
I just spent an hour and a half with them, and I want to chit chat with you about it.
Okay, that sounds great. You've got my number, right?
Can you give me your phone number?
Sure, it's 650-575-45.
This is a public meeting. It's being recorded.
No, that's fine. My mobile number is actually on the Menlo Park website. I find
okay.
it
Cool.
much better for the public to call me directly if they have a question than to leave a message or try and go through.
Me too. Mine is too. 45.
Call me directly. I can deal with it. 650-575-4523.
Yeah, KJ, we really appreciate that, but let me tell you, about 8,000 people have my cell phone number. It is not. It is not a.
Oh, you must get more texts than I do then.
I just looked at my 50 unopened texts, 675 unopened email.
I actually find that I can deal with things so much more effectively when someone just calls me and we can have a conversation.
That's why I'm going to call you. I didn't want to even begin to text you. I just want to chat with you for a few minutes.
That'd be great. I'd love that. Oh, and for anyone that is interested who would like to come, Menlo Park is having our first outdoor sculpture garden festival today at Menlo College. And they have millions of dollars for the sculptures. It's absolutely the most beautiful thing. And they're going to have panels speaking about the importance of art in communities. And in particular, the whole thing is funding a nonprofit to help bring art into open spaces. So any mayor or council member who's interested in bringing sculpture, public art, the idea is that you have it for a year or two, and the sculptures can migrate around city to city. So if you like it, take a picture. If you don't like it, hold on. It's much less controversial to have art come for a period of time in certain areas. So if anybody's interested in working with me on the public art nonprofit, contact me or come on out and see some of the great sculptures at Menlo College.
Kat, how long is those sculptures going to remain up? Can people see
Only
them?
the festival is this weekend.
Right, but will any of the sculptures remain up after Sunday?
I think some of them will be moved to Sunday late afternoon. Some of them might still be there. But the panels and all are today.
Menlo College, from what time? What time?
It's now until I think 6 for the panels.
Awesome.
And
Yeah,
yeah, it should be it's a really great program and a really great nonprofit that's being put together. And the idea is to get everyone in the Bay Area who's interested in bringing art into their city involved.
Oh man, we're so art starved here in Millbrae.
Yeah.
Silicon Valley is supposed to be a creative community, and I think that providing some outdoor art will help stimulate that further, particularly for young people.
Yeah, I've been really interested, Kat. Let me call you later.
Okay.
Give me a call.
Thanks for the announcement. Sorry to interrupt. We have, this meeting thing. I should probably keep going. All right. Financial review. Andy, take it away. Sorry for dropping off there.
Okay. Well, thank you. Recently, there have been a couple of meetings that we've sat in that board members and committee members have had questions about whether we should continue programs at the same magnitude or level, or whether we should cut back or pause them. The staff thought that it made sense to step back and review a few financial projections, review our assumptions, and assess the current sensitivities, and if necessary, revise forecasts up and down so we understood where we might be and whether it made sense. At the end of my presentation, I will summarize program spending, and then we'll talk about implementing a trigger level for when we would reassess, or when we should reassess. The agenda we'll go through is we'll do a review of the budget, and we do our budget in a 5-year projection, and the conservative assumptions that we've assumed in there about electricity load and old energy prices and PG&E generation rates and the PCIA rates. We will review energy price forecast summary, and also electricity load year to date, which is through August. We will talk a little bit about MRW forecasts, and I'll talk about that, about who they are in a minute. We'll combine all that, and then we'll talk about program expenses and what we are projecting and what the board's approved. So just to step back a little bit about key assumptions that are assumed in the current approved budget and the 5-year plan. For PG&E generation rates, which drive our revenues, we assumed an increase of 2% on January 1, 2021, and a 0.5% increase each year thereafter through for the next 4 years. We assumed PCIA rates would increase the current legislated cap or regulated cap of 0.5 cent on January 1, 2021. If you recall, we assumed a big increase on October 1. By the way, that won't happen, but it might be rolled into next year. A PCIA cap of 0.5 cent on January 1, 2022, and then we assume no change after that. For energy prices, PCE subscribes to a semi-annual energy price forecast, and we put our budget and forecast together based upon what was then the latest forecast, which was in November of 2019, which did not include the effects of COVID-19. And then based upon input from the Audit and Finance Committee a few months ago, we assumed a fairly conservative load assumption which included an extended period of depressed economy, especially in the small and medium business area, and that is overall assumed an overall loading decrease of 13% from our pre-COVID level. We called this our budget case, by the way. And then 2021-22, an overall load decrease of 10% from what we had been forecasting prior to COVID. And then for the next 3 years, an overall load decrease of 8%. That's just a step back. Want to talk a little bit, just refresh your memory about cash reserves, and because I'm going to talk a little bit about what the impact is on those. So the current board approved policy is that we take total cash and we deduct cash restricted by loan, term, or covenant. That's not a lot, except for one significant amount that we're holding for the Wright solar project that we expect to pay back in the next couple of months. Then we also deduct all cash restricted for committed program spending in future fiscal years. That's beyond the current fiscal year. And that equals our unrestricted cash. Then we take expenses per day and divide that by 360 or total annual expenses and divide by 360 to get an expenses per day. And that's how we calculated unrestricted days cash on hand. And I want to note that this is much more conservative calculation than the rating agencies use because they do not restrict for future programs. That's something we have decided to restrict. That's outside of the gap requirement, but we think makes sense to set aside cash for approved programs. This is a summary of what was approved by the board and is in our approved budget. So that's about in the middle column. It says FY 2021 approved budget. I won't go through all the columns, but just for that column, operating revenues in this fiscal year are projected or budgeted to be 215.7 million, operating expenses of 225.6 million. There's a small amount of operating income, but the change in that position as budgeted is $8.5 million negative, sorry, loss. And a projection of cash and cash equivalents of 186.6 million, but based upon our unrestricted cash and the way we calculate cash, unrestricted cash for our cash reserves, that number would be 153.9 million, which would have us be in an approved budget case, 246 days cash on hand, unrestricted cash. And that's updated to reflect our current program commitments, which I'll talk about a few slides from now. And if you also look out, based upon a few years of modest losses from $1 to $3 million, the projection that we put forth to the board at its meeting a couple of months ago showed that our unrestricted cash, days cash on hand, would be roughly 225 to 230 for the next 5 years. So a few things have happened and been updated. The first, I want to give you an update on energy price forecasts. We, as I mentioned, we use a semi-annual price forecast done twice a year. As I mentioned, the budget is based upon the one that was done in fall. We've now updated this for 2020, for spring 2020. And the major observations I want to make about our impact on net position. So this chart is on the change in net position that would be reflected based upon those new prices. In summary, prices are expected to be lower in the first 3 years of PCE's 5-year plan, and then expected to be somewhat higher in the last 2 years, and higher than, what I mean is higher than what we had projected in the original budget. But what you can see, and the blue line is the update, and the orange line is what was in the approved plan, is based upon energy prices, a significant improvement in that position from our current budget that would have a positive impact of $15 million over the 5-year time horizon, all of which is in the first 3 years, because the fifth year is somewhat lower. But in the full 5-year time horizon, $15 million positive. Feel free to, I'll take questions at the end unless there's ones you want to interrupt me for.
Let's take questions.
The next slide is the electricity load forecast. Our load forecast that was in the approved budget was based on a pretty slow economic recovery. The load right now is still below pre-COVID forecasted levels, but the early indications are that actual load is well above our conservative budget assumptions and closer to the original mid-case scenario. And the mid-case scenario was what we had first proposed to the Audit and Finance Committee, and then got input that maybe we were being too optimistic about the economic impact of COVID. That's not to say that that's right or wrong. We're still very early in that cycle. However, our early indications are that that our actuals are fairly significantly higher than what we had budgeted. And using the mid-case forecast, and I'll talk a little bit about the load in a next slide or two, if the mid-case forecast did play out the way it looks like it's playing out, and again, very early in just 4 months worth of data since we did this budget, that would add $21 million of positive impact in that position, mostly in the first 3 years. Here's a picture of load. The blue one was our pre-COVID forecast. So as I mentioned, our actual load over the last 4 months, so May, June, July, and August, that we have full month data for, is running lower than our old forecast. So that is not surprising. The next slide is relative to our budget. So the actual, again in red, and the budget load is brown. So August was 12.5% higher than our budget, although that did include a fairly significant heat wave for an extended period of time. But May, June, and July were 6.1 to 6.7% higher than our budget. So it does indicate, at least early indications are that our budget, and I think rightfully so, was fairly conservative, and we shouldn't expect at this point to have much downside. This is just a picture of the mid-case scenario, that just to give a sense, and it does at least, again, early indications and 4 months worth of data is that, and reason I'm showing 4 months worth of data back through May is because when we did the budget presentation to the board, it was based upon April actuals, because at the time we didn't have May, so we projected May, June, July, and August all the way through a 5-year time horizon. So at least in the last 4 months, the mid-case, again, August is a little bit higher and could be related to the heat wave, or contributed to the heat wave, but at least it does appear that it's reasonable, closer to the mid-case scenario than the current budget case that we're using. I want to talk a little bit about rate forecasts. So MRW is a consulting firm. If you recall, they were the consulting firm that was hired to do the Los Banos technical study. They've done a bunch of CCA technical studies, and they're one of the leading rate forecasters that most CCAs use. They provided a 10-year projection of forecast rates versus our 5-year planning horizon. I mentioned that they're an expert provider. They use for PCIA and for PG&E generation rates, they use a bottoms-up approach. They look at individual power plants that PG&E is using and when they're expected to roll off and the production in those. So instead of high level up, top level down economic forecast, they use a bottoms up. What do they really believe is going to happen in PG&E's business, and how would that translate into rates? The translation of their rates is, for first on PCIA rates, is that they're projecting slightly higher than PCE's forecast in the near term. So that would be a negative for PCE. They are projecting in the 4th and 5th years significantly lower PCIA rates than our forecast, and which would be significantly positive for PCE. And they're projecting from the 6 to 10 year time frame that we aren't budgeting. We only did a 5-year projection, as I mentioned, also significantly lower than what we assumed through the 5th year. That would be also significantly positive for PCE. On the PG&E generation rate, their projections are lower than PCE's forecast in the next 5 years, and that would be a negative for PCE. As part of that 5 years, they're significantly lower in the 3rd year, and you'll see the effects of that significantly lower in the third year impact in a slide or two when I get there. And they're projecting significantly higher rates than current levels in years 6 through 10, which would be significantly positive. This is a pictorial view of their projections. On the left side is PCIA rate. They did not provide a projection for the first 2 years, but the green is PCE's rate, where we, from 22 to 25, assumed no change, and MRW is assuming a substantially lower PCIA rate in the coming 7 to 10 year period after that. Part of that is related to Diablo Canyon coming out of service, but also other power plants that they're expecting to be rolled off and turned off. And now look down at the bottom before we go to the PG&E generation rate. The effective change in that position just from PCIA, their MRW forecast for the 2021, we've assumed a negative 8.5 million because they didn't provide a forecast. Theirs is the same. For years 1 through 5, we have a total from our current forecast of a negative 8.2 million. If we adopted their PCIA rate, that would be a positive $64 million to PCE's net position. And then annually in years 6 through 10, I mentioned that PCE did not forecast, but if we applied what we have in year 5 and going forward, it would be a positive $44 million a year. So $200 million positive from PCIA in the coming, those 6 to 10 years. On the other hand, PG&E generation rates, again, the green is PCE's assumption, which is a modest increase over the next 4 years. But MRW's forecast, again, is lower in year 2 and 3, and then a fairly dramatic rise in PG&E generation rates over the years 6 through 10, or actually 4 through 10. Down at the bottom, it shows PCE's forecast in year 1. Current year is negative 8.5. Because MRW's rate is lower, we actually may have if that is reflected in PG&E's generation rates, we would have a negative $12 million. In years 1 through 5, we've projected a negative 8.2 million. And if MRW's PG&E generation rates are correct, that they really do drop off in years 2 and 3, that would have a negative $81 million impact to PCE. So over $70 million worse. On the other hand, the year 6 through 10 would have a positive $27.8 million a year and growing positive impact to PCE. I'm going to pull all this together. It's a lot of numbers in a minute. So then we took the combined financial scenario, and for 5 and 10 year period, we pulled all of these forecasts together. So we updated for the actual year ending cash because the budget was based on an estimate and our year end was higher than budget. We've updated for we've included the updated energy price forecast, which I mentioned was positive in years 1 through 3 and negative in years 4 through 5. We've included a revised electricity load forecast, which is positive in years 1 through 3 and negative in years 4 through 5. We've included MRW's forecasts, which are negative in years 1 through 3 and positive in years 4 through 5, and then significantly positive in years 6 through 10. And then to do a 10-year forecast, we tried to take a pretty conservative view of those things that weren't forecasted out that far. So we assumed base load stays flat from year 5 all the way through year 10. Given that we're increasing our EV infrastructure and our programs around electrification, that we expect that to be conservative. Energy costs, we assumed escalate at 5% compounded per year starting in year 5. As you saw earlier today, our strategic plan assumes and hopes that we're going to be able to hold those costs constant for at least the next 5 years. So assuming 5% compounded per year or 30%, 25 to 30% in that period should be, is we believe, is pretty conservative. And we assumed all other costs, everything escalates at 5% compounded a year. Again, we believe a pretty conservative view since our costs don't go up. In fact, are fairly flat from last year to this year. With that, what we got in a 5-year period is this table. So the top is our current 5-year forecast. So the change in that position at the top is $8.5 million loss. Again, fluctuating plus or minus around 3 million negative to 6 million. The revised forecast with all those pieces encompassed and incorporated would reduce our loss this year to about $4 million, and does have a very significant negative year in 22-23 when PG&E's generation rates drop dramatically, of an $18 million loss. But that starts to dramatically change and improve over the years 4 and 5 to $30 million in year 5, and then growing, and you'll see in the next slide, growing from there. The other thing I wanted to point out here is if this all happened, our unrestricted days cash on hand would be lower at the end of this year from, instead of 246, would be the 233, and would not because we don't have a significant amount of as much cash, although we have a little bit less cash. The reason is because the expenses would be lower or higher. I can't remember which one. Anyway, the days cash on hand calculation would be different, and therefore our days cash on hand calculation would be lower. And although, and it does show again in that bad year that unrestricted days cash on hand drops to under 200 at 190 is the projection. I'm almost at a point to stop and take questions. This is a 10-year view based upon, again, all those forecasts and what we believe to be a very conservative expense projection that shows from year 1, negative $4 million, and the year 3 of negative $18 million, and then a pretty significant positive income over the last year 6 through 10, growing at $30 million to $6 million, but reflecting if you recall, all costs growing at 5% per year. That's energy costs and every other cost growing at 5% a year, which has a significant impact on our net position in the years. And even with all of those assumptions, a fairly positive amount over the number of years, and unrestricted cash growing from 147 million up to 265 million, with all of these negative PG&E rates, as well as costs growing fairly dramatically in the last year 6 through 10. I'll go through my conclusions, and then looks like Mr. DeGolia has a question, so I'll stop.
Really?
In other words, and our conclusions are as follows: the financial outlook is fairly positive and reasonably predictable. We don't see any significant downside in the next few years, other than the 3rd year by itself, and could be significant upside in our financial projections, especially starting in the 4th year and thereafter. In response to some of the questions about whether we think we should pause programs at this point, our recommendation is that we don't. We maintain program activities and commitments at the current levels, at least for now. And we would propose a sort of trigger implemented to decide when to scale back program activities and/or future commitments. And we would propose that if it appears that unrestricted days cash on hand would drop to below 200, and keep in mind that our policy is 180, and that policy is based upon a more conservative view of days cash on hand than the rating agencies, that if we thought it would drop below 200, that would initiate an effort to scale back either spending and or future commitments, both of which have a significant impact on days cash on hand, to ensure compliance. And as of today, that could happen in fiscal year 2022-23, and we will evaluate in the budget for that year. And as I mentioned, scaling back would mean a reduction in new program commitments brought to the board, and evaluation of expenses that could be reduced or delayed for already approved programs, and that would have an impact on net position in that year, and therefore ending cash position and cash reserve. So I have some more slides about programs, but I'll pause there and ask if there are any questions.
Okay, Pradeep has his hand up. Go ahead, Pradeep.
Andy, I support your conclusion that we should continue with the programs, because as I indicated earlier, that these programs are very much part of a strategy of how we are going to meet our goals. But I had a clarification question. The MRW projection of higher energy costs for PG&E 4 years later and afterwards, that reflects the market, energy market. Is the same trend also part of our cost picture on the expense side, so that our expenses would be increasing because of the same market situations, or are we not in what I say accordance with that factor?
Well, first of all, MRW is not our source for energy price forecasts. They're our source for PG&E generation rates and PCIA rates. Now, MRW, I don't know all the mechanics and the logic that they use in their projections, but presumably they're using their own version or of energy prices, the cost of energy, because those costs of energies are what drives PG&E's rates that they submit to the CPUC. However, I don't believe, I believe, and this is maybe somebody else more well-versed in the markets, including you, Pradeep, that PG&E's generation rates are as dependent on market price rates, because they have already locked in prices relative to their substantial production portfolio. So I think that their MRW's generation rate forecasts are more based upon PG&E's operations or the cost of operations rather than the price of MRW, but that's conjecture by me, and maybe somebody else who knows more could.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that we keep an eye on that, because if there are some significant assumptions which are more broader than just PG&E own portfolio, then we would be equally impacted by that, and our margins will become less.
Well, I understand, and I do agree we have to keep an eye on it. It's a critical part of our financial picture. This picture on the screen of PG&E's generation rates assumes roughly a 2.8 or 3% growth in PG&E's generation rates over that 6 to 10 year period. And while we don't have energy price forecasts for that long out, we only have them for the first 5 years. The financial picture I showed about the 10-year forecast assumed that energy prices would grow at 5% a year. Hopefully that is a reasonably conservative assumption that mitigates what you're talking about.
Yeah, I think that sounds good. That's very conservative, and thank you for the clarification.
Andy, you said you had some more slides?
About going into programs. If you want me to continue there, I can go.
Let's, we've got a hand from the public. Tom Cabot's got his hand up. Tom, go ahead and make your comment before we move on.
Thank you very much. Tom Cabot, Menlo Park resident, longtime utility resource planner. Thanks for presenting all this great information on the financial position of PCE. It looks extremely healthy in the financial position, especially compared to what's going on with the climate. And there are a number of very conservative assumptions being used in the financial projection. Things like no net load growth out in those future years, when so many of us are working to preserve the climate by electrifying everything. And so I would think that there's going to be substantially better performance than shown here in the finances of PCE, but substantially increased risk and damage in all the cities that make up the PCE territory from climate change. And so I'm seeing a disconnect that needs to be looked at in terms of sub-optimizing the total safety situation and financial well-being of the territory by preserving too much money and keeping it out of programs when it needs to be pouring into the programs to do the beneficial cascade that will lead to the transition that makes living in this area viable. So anyway, I'm just wanting to suggest you take a look at seeing how you can deploy more of the money into the programs. And this figure of days of cash on hand is the number of days you have cash on hand to survive having zero income and full outflow. And so it's a kind of an artificial statistic because you don't go to those situations, but we are in a real climate crisis. So anyway, my suggestion is take a look at how to balance this all and see what can be done. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. And Andy, so we could, do you want to just go through the program slides quickly, or do you want to pause here and talk about the recommendations?
We can. There's no board action we're taking on this.
We've got a few minutes. Why don't you finish the slides really quickly, and then we'll, well, you know what, Donna's got her hand up. Go ahead, Donna and Carlos have their hands up. Why don't you guys go ahead and make your comment now, and we'll.
Sure, this is Donna. So my comment is in response to Tom's astute observance about the cash on hand, is that there are two sort of overriding factors that we also have to consider. One is the actual amount of staff capacity to deploy into the program area, and we've got a lot of very complex and high-level staff, time requirement kind of activities that we're doing right now. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is that in order to maintain our rating agency standards, we do need to require in excess of about 180 to 220 days of cash on hand. The rating agencies, which are really important for us when we're doing our work in starting up some of the newer ventures, for example, the Wright Solar and other things where we might need to get a line of credit, or we might have other requirements as an organization. Those credit rating agencies will be looking to that cash on hand. So we cannot, even though I totally understand that we're not likely to run to an operational situation. Then the other, sort of third thing is a lot of our financials are just really predicated on the PCIA and what the charges are going to be in the future, which are very uncertain. So keeping that cash on hand in order to make sure that any uncertain contingencies that come into play allow us to continue to be economically viable is the most, one of the most paramount goals and objectives.
Okay, thank you, Donna. Carlos, go ahead.
Yes, I'm sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I would agree that it's important to have significant cash on hand to address both our credit as well as our operating needs, cash flow related, et cetera, Yet, and I know these are only projections, and everybody's crystal ball is ultimately broken anyway, but I think we need to be vigilant about how much cash we do amass, and we will be doing this, but certainly make sure that we are checking back with the board as we see these trends possibly become reality. And if we are winding up amassing a lot more money, really need to think about how that money gets deployed, or at least how we explain to our ratepayers, the users of our service, how we plan to utilize that money. Because I do think the initial caller, Tom, I think his comment and concern is quite legitimate, and amassing money for amassing money's sake, I don't think will do PCE any public relations benefit. So we should definitely be vigilant. Again, I have no idea if these numbers are going to actually pan out and if these trends are, but we should certainly try to stay on top of it. And again, figure out if we are amassing a lot more money, how much of that we actually do and should be deploying in the various programs and low-income kind of needs, et cetera, et cetera. Thank you.
Thanks, Carlos. Laura's got her hand up next. Go ahead, Laura.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate that. I think this is a great discussion, and I appreciate Tom's sentiment as well as the previous caller who described the sense of urgency around our situation, and Donna and Carlos's perspective. I think, my assumption is that given the metrics that were presented earlier today, that the budget forecast that Andy just went through is provides the available resources to ensure that staff can attain those particular goals. I think making sure that our agency is viable as we move forward and can make the appropriate investments, and that is shored up. At some point in the future, we may want to think about, do we become more aggressive and redeploy resources in such a way as to inspire a conversion over to electric at a greater pace, so as to help us further reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. So all good discussion. I think important to keep these perspectives in mind as we move forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Laura. Yeah, I want to second what, especially I think what Tom has said. The time is now. I mean, we're seeing, the fire season has suddenly become, we were expecting it to get worse. It got worse a lot faster than I think anyone really anticipated. All these things happening now are climate change is very much upon us. The reserve policy is important because it enables us to achieve our long-term goals going forward of financing a lot more new solar and a lot more new storage. So it's important that we pay attention to the reserve policy. That said, I think we have to take our chances with getting close to that reserve minimum, the 180 days, because the programs are a huge part of our long-term goal. So I think this recommendation is reasonable. I also think we should continue thinking, if not plowing the money into programs, sort of making sure that we know where and how we will plow the money into programs as our cash accumulation rates come back up. So we've got a couple of lean years. I don't think we should let that stop us, and then we should be prepared to go, all guns blazing if and when these projections pan out and the long-term cash accumulation starts ramping up. That would be I agree with these recommendations for now, and to just keep an eye with this trigger. It's 11 o'clock. Other comments on this item? Okay. Andy,
let me just finish up. I want to get into Raphael's presentation about programs, since that's apropos to the discussion.
Okay.
And I want to just basically set it up, telling you how we come up with programs. And I appreciate the input that was what we wanted to address with the board is address some of the questions about whether we should commit, and as the board sounds like it's consensus around, getting consensus around is that you agree with our recommendation. So program spending is the biggest non-energy part of our budget. It involves long-term commitments. Our budget and cash reserve projections assume the following: approximate spending of about $10 to $11 million a year for the next 5 years. And we've assumed that the board would approve new fundings of approximately $10 to $11 million a year. So basically future commitments which stay fairly flat over the next period of time, which is how we've made our projections. This is our program approval process. The board approves a specific program, which is usually multi-year and multi-element and has some overall specific objective. And we're going through this because sometimes we think it might be a little confusing about all the different approvals that come to the board. And then by policy, we're obligated to bring each contract that exceeds $100,000 to the board for specific approval. And that may include several or more than several contracts that might be part of the same overall multi-year program that the board has approved. And then as part of that overall overarching program, there are other expenses and commitments that would each be less than 100K that the board wouldn't see, but we track them as part of the overall program. So down below is an example. The EV infrastructure was $16 million over 4 years, was approved by the board in December of 2018. We brought a contract to the board for approval, which was Clear Result, which was $2 million over 4 years, approved in August of 2019. We will soon bring other contracts to the board, each of 100K, and there will be other commitments that internally we make, which each would be less than 100K, which we're not obligated to bring to the board, but in total we track, and in total would not exceed the $16 million approved by the board. This is our detailed program budget process that we go through each year. So on the left side is, in dark blue, is the approved 2021 budget, which was $225.6 million of total expenses. That's made up of a series of categories, but the largest is energy, which is $197 million. And then the second is community energy program, which is $7.6 million. And that is made up of spending on a series of programs that may have been approved, that would have been approved prior to that by the board, but we only count the current year spending in those. So program 1, 2, 3, and 4 plus just the current year spending, even though there is future years spending. And then down below are other spending categories, which add up to the total of $225 million. At the same time, we manage and look at cash reserves that are set aside. So as of today, there's $27.6 million that's set aside for future spending. So spending on programs that have been approved beyond the current fiscal year. So for community energy programs, that's $18.7 million. So again, program 1, program 2 through N, same ones as over there, but only the spending that would be in future years that we're reserving for in our cash reserves. And then there are other programs outside of the community energy programs that Raphael manages, including resilience and marketing programs. And right now, the reserve for that is $8.9 million. This is a very detailed chart, which I won't spend much time on, but I want to go through just the top portion of that I showed the Audit and Finance Committee on August 10th. I'm only going to go through the first one just to make sure that it's clear how this works. So the EV infrastructure program was $16 million approved by the board on 12/20/18. The board has approved a contract for Clear Result that was $2 million on August 22/19. and then a contract for Center for Sustainable Energy on October 24th, 2019 for $850,000. There also will be customer incentives provided through the Center for Sustainable Energy that are $7.1 million, and other incentives. Some of these other spending that are expected to be spent might come to the board as contracts, but we track the entire $16 million. Over on the closer to the far right, on this $16 million program, spent as of the beginning of the fiscal year was $146,000 so far. We estimate in the current year how much spending we will spend for that program. So in this case, there are $5.1 million made up of $500,000 as part of the contract. A clear result, we're anticipating $4 million of customer incentives paid. So we take the $16 million, we deduct the $146,000 that was spent in prior years. We deduct the $5.1 million that is expected to be spent this year, and we have reserved as part of our cash reserves the balance of $10.7 million for that program. And we go through that for each program that's been approved by the board. This shows all the board approval dates, and the bottom shows the $18.7 million that is reserved in future years for energy programs. The following page shows the other ones, which I won't go through for resilience and building electrification awareness, but the total programs on the far right for reserved in future years is $27.6 million as of today, and we revise this every sorry, went back on a regular basis. And that $27.6 million is how we determine our current levels of unrestricted cash on hand for determining cash reserves. So we go through this on an ongoing basis, and we monitor all of this spending.
Okay, thanks, Andy.
Sure.
So now we will transition to Raphael's review of our programs. We're in the home stretch here. We're still relatively good on time. I am, though, because it seems to be working, I am going to ask that we hold questions until Raphael's finished. If you have a question during the presentation, try to make a note of the slide you're on, and we'll come back to it at the end, and do raise your hand. Raphael, go ahead.
Well, if I can say one thing, Jeff.
Oh, sorry, Dan, yes.
You know, when we were putting this together, we were really trying to figure out how could we make this interactive and fun for you guys, and it was like impossible to do that in this virtual setting. So we apologize that it's really presentations to you rather than interactive. We just couldn't figure out how to do the public and breakouts rooms and all that kind of stuff. So bear with us for another 50 minutes. Thank you so much.
No, understood, and thank you. Yeah. Go ahead, Raphael.
Thank you. So jumping off from Andy's discussion of the financials, what I'm going to do here is provide a little more detailed view in terms of the overall picture on programs, the investment, the timing of the investments, and the impact from a greenhouse gas standpoint of the greenhouse gas specific elements of our program work. Next slide. So first, this is a conceptual model of the full picture of our program's work at this point. A couple things to call out here is we of course have three major segments: buildings, transportation, and resiliency. Around the wheel, if you will, you'll see the specific segments that each program area is addressing within those broad sectors. So starting at the top, new construction, naturally reach codes and technical assistance. Then going on to existing buildings, we have appliance incentives, low-income homes, associated marketing and training, and so forth around the wheel. Everything represented here has been approved by the board with one exception, and that's municipal fleets, which has been approved by the executive committee to go to the board, was originally planned for August, but now planned for October. one of the key points really to take away here, if you'll click forward, Shana, next, is that by the end of this year, we will essentially have approximately 90% of the original 2018 roadmap, which was a near-term roadmap for programs, will be deployed or in the process of being deployed to address these various segments. So that's a way of saying that we have a quite full portfolio by the end of this year, which is not to say that there isn't important work to be done in further refinement, maybe additional segments to look at, maybe additional strategies to bring within each of these segments. But we do have what I would describe as an initial relatively complete portfolio of programs. So we will be moving away from showing you the old 2018 roadmap as we have in prior meetings, and use this as a way of speaking to the entirety of our program work as the overall conceptual view. Next slide. This is a distribution of the approved investments by specific area. A couple things to call out here. Obviously, EV infrastructure is the largest committed investment that we have. That's the large green area for $16 million. And then resilience at $10 million is the next largest overall segment. Of course, there are sub elements associated with resilience, and we'll be speaking to that here in a moment. And then existing buildings at just over $6 million is the large yellow segment in the lower left, with a variety of additional elements. So again, this is intended to show the distribution of planned investment. This is approximately a set of 4 years of committed investment at this point. Next slide. And with that, I'd like to invite Siobhan to speak to this slide on resilience.
Yeah, thank you, Raphael. So this shows our budget. As you guys remember, in January of this year, we presented a strategy for resiliency, asking the board to approve $10 million over 3 years. Since then, we've brought a couple of specific contracts to you to implement parts of that strategy. So the biggest one was the Sunrun contract to help us meet our resource adequacy obligations and provide residential customers with solar and battery systems for backup power. So the first 2 bars here are part of that contract. We're working with Terra Verde to get that implemented, and then Sunrun will start delivering that resource adequacy to us. The number that's here for Sunrun, the $474,000, that's a subset. That's just trying to capture the premium, the part of the program that's not covered by power resources. Since this is providing one of our energy products, we're trying to separate the cost of the program between our energy budget and our program budget. And then we have also brought to you the what we're calling Power and Peninsula Medical, and this is our portable battery program. We have a couple of contracts under that one. The biggest one is with Hassett Hardware, who is procuring portable batteries for us and then delivering those to customers. Under this program, you guys have approved $750,000, and we are actively providing those batteries to our customers right now. There are a couple of other programs that were in the budget that are still in the implementation phase. One is Municipal CRC, stands for Critical Resource Center. So we've been working with East Bay to evaluate a number of facilities throughout the county for backup power. There's the remaining part of the distributed RA program. So we're hoping to bring a commercial developer in to deploy solar plus storage systems to commercial customers. We have some additional budget around medically fragile customers. So I think learning from some of the lessons this fall, we'd want to deploy that in the next year to help additional customers. We also allocated some money towards critical infrastructure, so looking at water, communications, things of that sort. And then there's also part of the budget for future programs, so really focusing more on the outer years, thinking about what else should we be doing. Just want to provide a breakdown of where we were with the programs and the status of the budget. Thanks,
Great.
Rafael.
Thank you, Siobhan. Next slide. Here's a similar view with regards to the vehicles segment within the transportation sector. So we have approximately a little over 3.5 million that has been committed over 4 years, including EV incentives, which are have been planned to run through 2021. We have the low-income used EV program, a partnership with Peninsula Family Service. That contract is set to expire next year, February, and we do have planned to come back to the board with an update, proposed update for both new and used vehicles to account for these elements tailing off in programs, and that will be for future discussion in October. We have an engagement marketing program, what has been a ride and drive program and is now being refactored to provide alternatives, including hotline service, one-to-one test drives, and other elements. That's $750,000 over 3 years. We will be asking the board to consider reallocating some of those funds because not all of them have been used. And then the forthcoming programs for ride hailing and e-bikes that the board has recently approved that we are looking to implement. Next slide. EV infrastructure program is already discussed, a number of major elements, the technical assistance element, the incentives through Cali VIP with our partner, the Center for Sustainable Energy, which is a major piece of that. Additional incentives, the $4 million, which are incentives that PCE will directly administer, and then the workforce and other elements of the program. Next slide. We have a couple trailing items here with some EV charging pilots. The low power charging pilot, which is a 3-year program for $400,000. This is in the closing stages from a research standpoint and is moving to installation. This is to assess options and costs for lower cost charging access, particularly for apartments. And then curbside pilot, where we're moving into the assessment phase with a contract with Arup at just under $100,000. That's a 6-month assessment, and if deemed successful, then we would look at curbside pilot subsequent to that, and these are also approved funds totaling $1 million. Next slide. Buildings, here we've combined new and existing buildings. For new buildings, we of course have the REACH codes and associated technical assistance. That's a relatively inexpensive program of $250,000 over 2 years. As you may recall, that was an extension over the prior, just over a year-long contract with TRC. And this is a joint effort with Silicon Valley Clean Energy. Silicon Valley Clean Energy is covering about $200,000 not shown here. And then moving on to existing construction where we have the water heaters and potentially other appliances over time, low-income homes and other pilots. And then of course, under the marketing team, a building electrification awareness program. And again, this is just under $7 million over 4 years, and gives the directors here a sense of the timeframes associated with these elements. Next slide. Turning to emissions, we wanted to also provide here some detail with regards to the scale of the problem and where we stand in terms of the impact of our investments. First of all, we are working with the County Office of Sustainability on an updated emissions inventory. That will be a 2019 inventory that will be available by the end of this year. So we are currently operating with a 2015 inventory. That inventory shows total annual emissions of 5.2 million metric tons of greenhouse gas CO2 equivalent. out of that, electricity comprises just under 800,000 metric tons. Next. Now, moving to 2021, we know that on an annualized basis, PCE's electricity will be greenhouse gas free, which effectively means that the only greenhouse gases associated with electricity will be from direct access. And that brings us to the projection shown here next. This pie chart shows an approximation of what we believe the 2021 emissions picture will look like based on what we have here on the left. So what we've done is we've taken the 2015 emissions inventory and we've removed the PCE electricity portion, which brings the emissions associated with electricity to 2%. And again, this is on an annualized basis. And as you can see, the key elements here that remain, obviously, are transportation at somewhere around 70% and building natural gas at somewhere around a quarter of the overall emissions. I want to call out, however, that the natural gas portion of this emissions inventory is probably significantly understated if one factors leakage associated with methane, and that the natural gas portion of the pie could be as much as 50% larger than shown here. We also don't include air travel or embedded carbon is not represented in this pie chart, but it is intended to provide a frame of reference in terms of the scale of each of the sectors that we're dealing with. Next slide. This diagram is a preliminary analysis of the emissions benefit by funds invested. And this is using the average annual greenhouse gas reduction as discussed earlier as part of the dashboard. The x-axis shows funds invested, so from 0 to $18 million, and the y-axis showing emissions reductions per year, again, average emissions reductions based on a 10-year analysis. There are several things to call out here. First of all, it is preliminary. We are still working through the methodology. There's quite a bit of complexity that we're working through, but we're reasonably confident that at least on orders of magnitude, this is reasonably accurate. The first thing is, in terms of the results here, is of course the EV infrastructure results are very good. Good emissions reduction associated with the EV infrastructure investment, and though it is also, of course, our largest point of investment. The ideal location you would want with programs is for everything to be in the upper left, inexpensive and a lot of emissions benefit. So the more we're closer to the upper left, that shows a high degree of efficiency in the investments. But candidly, it's difficult to get things to be in the upper left. What is also I would call out here is the reach codes is for the investment. They provide a very significant value in terms of emissions benefit. Now, what's not factored here, which will move that dot up, is the EV infrastructure associated with the reach codes. We're still working through those calculations, so that number is going to go up. The reach codes, however, for new construction are effectively a one-time benefit. At some point, the state code will catch up, and new construction will no longer be a low-hanging fruit opportunity for us to secure. However, there may be opportunities for codes in terms of existing construction, and some municipalities, Menlo Park in particular, have already started exploring this as a point to consider. A couple other points here. I'll note that existing buildings, our effort on existing buildings from an emissions standpoint is relatively modest. but the long-term emissions potential there is very large. And at some point, electric vehicles will benefit from more market momentum. And of course, the governor's order this past week at some point will shift the market, assuming that executive order is put into effect for 2035. But there's still a lot of work to do naturally in that regard. And then the last point that I would call out here is that the overall emissions benefit here is approximately 1% of the annual emissions in the county. And in fact, in the far upper left, you'll notice an estimate of how many vehicles removed from the road, so to speak, 60,000 metric tons represents. It's about just under 13,000 vehicles, and we have approximately 650,000 vehicles on the road. That is all to say that we're just getting started. If I were to characterize the past 2 years of our work, it was fundamentally capacity building, getting into the space, developing the program models and infrastructure to be able to scale. And it is still early days in terms of actual impact to be delivered from this work. And with that, I think that's my last slide. We have some backup slides for in case there are certain questions. But with that, I'd like to turn it back over to the board chair.
Thank you, Raphael. Questions, comments about the program, the current state of the program, our programs? Rick, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I'll stop trying to raise my hand. Couple of questions. Regarding the charging program, I was wondering, I know that recently, last time I heard, things appear to be heading in the right direction in terms of our efforts to be able to require EVITP training in our charging efforts. I don't recall hearing whether that was ever fully, completely settled. Could somebody please talk to that?
Sure. So we have been engaged at multiple levels with regards to advancing, as you know, Rick, the EVITP training, which is the electric vehicle training program, as a requirement for the electric vehicle infrastructure. We have that incorporated into our own dedicated funds, but they are not adopted yet in Cali VIP. We have had discussions with the with commissioners, as Director Bonilla has participated in, and those discussions seem favorable. And the CEC did run a workshop, which received a lot of positive support for that, but it's still unclear exactly what the implementation plan may be by the California Energy Commission. So we're continuing discussions both with the Center for Sustainable Energy as well as higher level discussions with the California Energy Commission. Joe may be able to shed further light on the discussions at that level.
Yeah, if you could please, Joe, that'd be good.
Well, I think things are moving forward, and I think our work at the commission is going to position us well to lead on this effort. I do think there is more engagement we can have to lead on the effort. So I think we're just going to have to, keep working at it.
Okay. One other thing. I noticed that ride hailing is also part of our list of programs. And I wanted to mention that to the extent that they have a lot of cars on the road, I think that's important, because if we're able to affect change there, then that would probably eliminate a lot of emissions. But I only have one concern, which is, well, first I see that it's only a small program that we're looking at there, and I'm not sure exactly. But my concern is that if the state attorney general and California law prevail, those same businesses, which I think have never ever been profitable, might not exist next year as they exist now. Also, there's this measure on the ballot, which obviously would have a big difference one way or the other, depending on the outcome of the vote. But I think we should focus on keeping that small for this period of time because it could turn out there's no future there. So, thanks.
Yes, and we do have a pending contract with Flex Drive, which is a vehicle provider for Lyft. And that contract is pending resolution of the legal and political issues. So we're well aware that we won't be able to embark on that. It is what I would describe as a pilot with 100 vehicles, which could represent as much as 6 million miles a year. So there is a significant emissions benefit for the cost. But yes, all of the legal and political questions are outstanding before we move forward.
Great, thanks.
And Rick, this is Jan. One more thing. We do have a meeting scheduled with Commissioner Monahan at the California Energy Commission. I don't have the date in front of me right now, but I'd encourage you to join us for that discussion again, especially regarding the EVITP.
That's great. Please send me the information. I'd be happy to be there.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Rick. I'm gonna, Tim, I see your hand up. I'm gonna call on board members and then we'll come to the public comments at the end of that. So thanks for your patience. Carlos is up next and then Rick.
Rafael, on your program cost and GHG reduction slide, March full adoption, there's a 50,000 plus metric ton number reduction in GHG emissions for the EV infrastructure, and that has to be a function of something, correct? Because in and of themselves, they don't reduce the GHG. It has to be a function of either adoption of EVs or something else. I mean, it's
Yes.
a huge number, and I want to understand how that was calculated.
Right. You're absolutely right that installing an EV charger doesn't do anything on its own. And that presumes that vehicles are there to utilize those charging ports. It is proportional to the vehicles, and it is completely contingent on vehicles being there. For some segments, experience has been that the vehicles show up quite quickly. So fast charging and workplace charging, the vehicles show up quickly. And we're, in fact, drawing on quite a bit of research in terms of utilization for developing this number. For apartments, there is a lag time. We don't know exactly what that lag time is. We've modeled them in deriving this number. We're expecting roughly about a 3-year lag between and some growth over time before vehicles start showing up at the ports that are installed in apartments. And as we go, we, of course, hope to learn more to refine these numbers.
Just a super quick follow-up. Would you consider your 50,000 number a conservative number, or is it more on the aggressive side?
At this point, well, candidly, there are a lot of uncertainties in terms of what driving patterns are going to be. If commute patterns are depressed for a lengthy point in time, if work from home becomes a permanent feature for a very large percentage of workers, then we're probably too aggressive. We've taken, this number is, we've cut it down, frankly, quite a bit from the research numbers that we were basing this on, which were pre-COVID research numbers. So
thank you.
The bottom line is I don't know.
Thanks.
Thanks, Carlos. Rick DeGolia, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to emphasize Raphael's point about the efficient return on the reach codes. And, you know, we had anticipated getting the reach codes implemented at our cities by the end of last year in connection with the new changes that came into effect with state California building code laws. And that happened for a few, but obviously the discussion has continued with many. And the big issue there is us needing to invest in the expense that it takes to educate both building department staff and council members on the value of the reach codes, which I think came up pretty clearly in KJ's marketing material. And I think we should, you know, many cities are going to be changing and upgrading their climate action plans over the next couple years. And implementing the reach codes is an obvious, you know, additional plan that hopefully will be included in those upgraded climate action plans. So I think it's really important that we see the effort that we put in last year and have continued this year is not a one-time thing, but is an ongoing thing over a long period of time. Because people are going to change their opinions as we experience the increasing impact of climate change and, you know, the air quality and everything that we're experiencing. And we need to focus on these issues and not let them go because, for example, in my town, I mean, I wasn't at the meeting, but the Atherton Council voted not to even have the discussion, which is embarrassing, but it's a reality. And I'm going to find a way to bring that up next year. It's going to be rediscussed and hopefully, ultimately, it's going to be implemented. So I just think this is a really big area that we can't let go of, and we need to improve our abilities to make the proper connections with the building department staff and the council members so that they will adopt these reach codes.
Thanks, Rick. Yeah, that's a great point. Portola Valley is on the verge of, we're having a study session next month, but we got badly delayed by various events this year. I wanted to add one thing. It's kind of a question, Raphael. You know, you mentioned at one point that in the future that new building and reach codes stop benefiting us. But, you know, given that most residential building in San Mateo County is infill, every time you pull down a gas-powered building and replace it with an all-electric building, you do get some more benefit. Is that sort of factored in here going forward?
So I'm sorry, I'm not sure I quite follow the question. If you could repeat, please.
Well, you were saying that you know, as we, you know, as the code goes to all electric, it's sort of we stop adding greenhouse gas savings, but because most residential, you know, most single family residential construction here is basically tearing down an old house and replacing it with a new house. So you're replacing an old gas building with a more efficient all electric building. So there's a continued benefit. I mean, the reach code continues to benefit us even if it's sort of not above code. But I'm just curious, is that sort of factored into this calculation?
No, there are a number of nuances. So what you're describing is accurate. It is also the case that the reach codes, as implemented in most cities, have a number of exceptions. Over time, lifting those exceptions probably would produce additional greenhouse gas benefits. Yeah. And then there may be significant opportunity to look at codes associated with existing construction. Mm-hmm. From the standpoint of overall benefit, that's where the largest opportunities lie.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, agreed. Thank you. Okay, Pradeep's got a comment, and then we've got two public comments. Go ahead, Pradeep.
Thank you, Jeff. Raphael, just to reiterate, and we had a little discussion on that before, I hope that you keep a track of the demand shaping attribute of these programs somewhere on the back of your mind so that when we pull it all together, we can see what benefits we have on resource side as well from these programs besides having the GHG benefit.
Yes.
That was my comment.
Yes, absolutely. And that is something that we have been giving attention to. On EVs, that's where the most significant opportunities lie. We're estimating somewhere on the order of by to 7% overall load gain by 2025 if we're meet our EV targets. On building electrification, it's actually extremely modest, less than 1% by 2025 of additional load, and only about 50% of that is likely to land in peak time. So it's very modest in the near term, but of course will grow long term.
Thank you. That's excellent.
Thanks. Okay, Tim and Tom have been waiting patiently. Tim, go ahead.
Yeah, so firstly, what a great chart this is. And the chart shows, you know, for people outside citizens, in terms of the spend, somewhat public spend that's going out per greenhouse gas, which we really care about, and how that works. And so that you would have this chart, and it doesn't mean it's perfectly attuned and calibrated yet, everything, but it shows, it gives a great transparency, which also we in the Citizen Advisory Council Committee can talk about. It's great. That you've built out this capacity to run these kind of programs is amazing. That the whole PCE as a company and basically this board has built out the volume of program spend, even if it could be more, it is very significant. And so I want to commend that. I think that's a huge, huge deal, and I just hadn't seen that before. I want to say I come from a marketing and product background in Silicon Valley, and if there is the opportunity, I mean, here's an opportunity with one of the best government-driven success stories ever, the cash position, the credibility. For me is the question, what are you going to do with it? And so I think it's about a marketing also level to enhance the program efficacy that you have. And for me, for instance, when I look at it and just things to think about, it's okay to brag. We in San Mateo County have achieved a 13% reduction over the last years. I don't think anyone knows about that. You know, stop thinking as a public agency, start thinking about in terms of, you know, and not just environmentalists, look at everyone in San Mateo County, make it about cost, innovation, fun. So for instance, one of the things is, are you in the trenches for me to lower the costs? Which, again, there has been a lot of work most people don't know about. One of the biggest things now that happened is we're sitting in the orange skies and we don't know if PCE is an active part of that. Now, marketing efficacy is you run the programs and we hear about PCE and we don't know what it wants to do. And so I just want to go back to, that's the reason of having a short-term also greenhouse gas goal, because if you point to 2045, you lose all legitimacy and you don't have a voice and people stop reading right there. And if you can signal, this is the thing where we've understood the urgency, we're running after it. And final word is, please do tell people because they want hope in these times. And this is one of the best stories that is happening. And, you know, here a government agency is doing it. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Tom Cabot, go ahead.
Thank you. So I'm really enjoying the great discussion about the programs and how they're starting out, and just visualizing back to that last graph that was shown on the two axes. The bottom axis was dollars invested, and that's one aspect of each program, but all of those programs end up being revenue generators, operational revenue generators, because they deploy more of PCE's product, and you're earning 2 or 3 or 4 cents a kilowatt hour on average on the load shapes you're deploying on. So those things are covering a bunch of their costs, but as Raphael pointed out, they are the startup efforts, which are not expected to be necessarily cost effective on their own, but they do lay the groundwork for full-scale implementation of measures that will really show the leadership that's needed now to inspire cities around the country to follow if we're going to keep the bay down in the bay and the fire out of the hills. So we've got to be looking at how to be aggressive with moving these experiments forward, making them bold, following that IPCC advice, to be doing everything we can to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in ways that are rapid, far-reaching, and unprecedented. And as I pointed out before, we need to put our days of revenue on hand type of statistic to good use instead of risking our years of survivable county on hand as a statistic. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Okay, 2 more board comments, and then we'll move on to wrap up. Pradeep and then Betsy.
I think I already taken care of my comment. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Betsy, go ahead.
Thank you. I just want to mention that we have a significant opportunity with building electrification with the RENA numbers that are coming out, and as all our cities must respond and build more housing. And beyond the mandates, there's a big opportunity, I think, to encourage building with all electric just from education and all the benefits to it. But we will be having a significant amount of housing built in this area, and to get it all electric would be wonderful.
I think it's critical. Thank you, Betsy. Rick, go ahead.
Just a quick question. Raphael, I was struck by the comment that you made about the load increase associated with the EV infrastructure implementation. And I wonder if that projection is included in our financial projections about load.
I'll defer here to Siobhan and Andy. What I can say is we have been incorporating some load growth. There's, the rate of load growth there's a lot of uncertainty there, and I believe the numbers that we've been using there have been perhaps more conservative than what our upper end potential may be.
Siobhan or Andy, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I can jump in. As Raphael is absolutely correct, we've been using load growth numbers as we forecast out, but they're more conservative than what Raphael stated as 5 to 7%.
Yeah, I recall the same thing. We've had multiple conversations, especially at Audit and Finance, about this, and we know it's going to happen. We don't know how much. So, thank you. Okay, if there's no other comments, then we can move on to conclusion. Jan, are you going to start on this?
Sure. I think we appreciate everyone coming this morning, getting up so early, not having the goodies that we normally provide to you. I think we're done. And if there are any other further ideas, concerns, suggestions, please let us know, and we'll incorporate those. Our plan on the strategic planning dashboard is to come back to you every year with an update on that. And certainly as you think about it more after hearing the presentation, if you have more feedback on that, please let me know.
Okay, thank you, Jan. Yeah, I just want to take a minute and thank the staff for organizing this. I'll thank the executive committee and board members who have sort of helped review this agenda, come up with this plan. We covered a lot of ground this morning. Thank you all for being here first, and for your sort of patience and attention. These are the starts of several more conversations, especially around the dashboard, but I think it's a great start and a tool for us to sort of keep evaluating the progress we are making. And so, these past 5 years have been pretty amazing in terms of what we achieved, but we also see how much more we have to do. The urgency has become very clear, especially this year. So again, thank you all. And I see Kat has a comment. Any other comments we can make right now? And then we will wrap up hopefully on time. Kat, go ahead.
I was just going to say the same thing. I'm really impressed with not only staff's hard work, is obvious that we see through all the presentations, but their creativity. And that's probably due to Jen's leadership as well. Encouraging people to think out of the box and find great ideas that we can bring in. And I don't feel like we can ever say thank you enough to staff. And I just wanted to say that I thought that the creativity and the dedication was obvious in the presentations that we saw.
And if I can make one more comment, Jeff, I think, a lot of what we were trying to show today was that there's a lot of moving pieces, especially in the financial area, but that we are financially strong, and that the concern that maybe we needed to cut back on programs is not something we believe we need to do. So it's full steam ahead. The PCIA is the big unknown, and we're continuing to work on that. Thank you all for those of you who signed on to that letter that was sent to the PUC. Hopefully that opens their eyes a little bit. Who knows? No promises there, but we're trying, and that will be a continually evolving narrative. And that we are focused 100% on that and making sure that it's being done in a fair manner, or that hopefully it can be done in a fair manner.
Yeah, no, thank you for your ongoing efforts on that. It's a thorny issue. Carol, did you have a hand up? There I see you. Okay, go ahead.
I just wanted to, I think I'm mute again.
No, you're up. I hear you.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that this was really a productive day. And again, thank you to the staff and to you, Jeff. But even though we all attend most of the meetings, you always think you know more. But I think I learned a few things today. So I'm really delighted.
Good. Okay. Yeah, no, I agree. This was, I think we covered a lot of ground in a short time. Maybe not quite the interaction we might have liked to have had, but sorry for that. And sorry I don't get to actually see everyone in person these days. I miss you guys.
Yeah.
But please do reach out to me, reach out to staff, bring your questions, bring your thoughts. We have a really strong team here among staff, the board, and our Citizens Advisory Committee, and our very diligent public. So if there are no other comments, again, thank you all for your time and your attention. And I look forward to continuing the work.
Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you, you too.
Take care. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Great job.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
James.
Bye-bye.
That was great.
Hey, Anders.